Hey guys, I want to apologize for there not being a live stream tonight. I've had an extraordinarily difficult afternoon today. Car seized up, left me stranded on the road. But I wanted to at least give you guys a little bit of something to watch. So tonight, I have the first interview that I ever did with Ty Beard. Now, this is a very, very long live stream, but Ty's time is extremely precious, so it was really great being able to get him for such a long period of time. Now, in this video, Ty and I discuss the then ongoing legal situation between Wizards of the Coast and Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss. This has been resolved. This is a resolved situation, but Ty's keen legal mind is very, very welcome on the subject. I hope to have him on the show again soon. But here is our first meeting. We meander and talk for a really long time, so this might be one you'll want to put on maybe when you got a lot of free time, a long drive perhaps, something like that. But anyway, regardless, please click the like button if you like the video, click the subscribe button if you're not, and the bell icon for notifications. That's super useful. And before we get started, of course, I just want to remind everybody that this video is brought to you by Hellebarde Games. Hellebarde publishes the modules that they'd like to play, with offerings from OSR, Castles and Crusades, and 5th edition. No matter what rules are in use, old school gaming is at the table. You can get Hellebarde products directly from their website at hellebardegames.com or through Drive-Thru RPG. So with that said, on with the show. Hey, good afternoon to everybody. How you doing today? It is Friday. It is 5 o'clock somewhere, so I hope you guys don't mind. I'm going to have a little cold snack, and we are just waiting for Ty Beard, today's guest, to join us. Now, he will be joining us via Zoom, so as quick as he calls in or messages me or whatever, he will be joining us there, and we're going to talk about his tabletop game design work, and we're going to talk about the Weiss and Hickman brouhaha that is currently ongoing against Wizards of the Coast. I have already talked about it, at least just given my inexpert non-opinions on how I think that whole thing's going to play out. But in addition to being a game designer, Ty is an attorney, so he will be offering actual legal input on that. That's the one thing that I never do. And if you're familiar with me, here, let me just adjust this a bit. If you're even a little bit familiar, you know that I don't do that. I don't get on the internet and start stating my opinions as being any kind of legal input or advice. So I reached out to Ty, and for various reasons, but primarily to get some perspective on the Weiss and Hickman versus Wizards of the Coast issue, he decided to hop on and talk to us today. So we're just I'm just gonna shoot him shoot him a quick message there, let him know that we are raring to go. Uh, but yeah, we'll talk to Ty. We'll get his opinion on this and have a fine old time doing it. So just waiting on him to dial in. Now I've got of course, the big event, if you are in the Orlando area, if you're traveling through or you are a resident around here, tomorrow, myself and Tracy Lesh will be down at Gods and Monsters. We will be signing copies of the Lost Crypt module, and Tracy will have a whole bunch of art you can spend a little bit of coin on and pick up signed prints of previously unreleased original Dungeons and Dragons artwork. That's right, you can get signed prints of artwork he did for TSR back in the day, and yeah, you will be able to own a piece of gaming history there that it's not even in art and arcana. Okay, and yeah, so he'll have some beautiful pieces of art there. I'll be there signing my modules, and he'll be signing the Lost Crypt also, as he did a piece of art in it. So yeah, that's gonna be a lot of fun. That's gonna be a good time. So we're looking forward to that, and we're just like I said, waiting on Ty to dial into the meeting. Now, one thing that I do want to touch on before Ty gets here is we still have not had an answer/guess of this week's trivia question. Can you list all so I can purchase them at some point? Yes, Dave, I will. The two that I have for sale, one is through Frog God Games. Actually, there are 3 commercial modules that I have gotten published. One is The Lost Crypt through Frog God Games. I'm just gonna real quick while we're waiting on time, I'm gonna throw the links to these up here. So let's see. All right. Okay, so here is the link to Lost Crypt. And let's see. Here is Temple of the Sun. That now Temple of the Sun is through Hellebarde Games, and they are a fantastic games company. And finally, the other one, and you might have a little bit of trouble finding this. I'm going to look for it on DriveThru first, and see if it's available there. Oh my, that's good. Let's see. Nope, I think we'll have to go all the way up to the top. And this is Elemental Moon. Now, whoops, that's not right. There we go. Elemental Moon, I co-wrote with Lance Havermehl under a pen name, but you can honestly say that you've got a piece of Bill Sylvie original writing if you pick up Elemental Moon, even though it's under the pen name of Andy Luke Crossness. And there's a long, convoluted, not worth discussing joke as to why I used a pen name and that particular pen name to boot. So, yeah, you can pick all those up. I was hoping this weekend, and I'm still kind of hanging on to a faint but fading hope that I would have physical copies of Temple of the Sun for sale at the event at Gods and Monsters tomorrow. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that I will, but when I do actually get the physical copies, I will start selling those. Probably just on a first come first served basis if there's not another event for me to have those at. And they're pretty deluxe. I just want to say I didn't want to start showing them off until I had a copy or copies, a box of copies that I could sell to you guys. But these are pretty deluxe. If you get the Osric version, you get a removable cover, like old school, with the maps on the inside of the cover. But regardless of which version you get, whether it's perfect bound is stapled on the spine, I think, I'm not sure. But it's the cover stapled on. Regardless of which version you get a poster, you get character cards, and you get a separate sheet that lists all the monsters, their locations, and their hit points through it. Now, for those of you who've been following me for a long time, you might remember that Temple of the Sun was the name of another module that I wrote and distributed for free, and still distribute for free. I can't remember where I'm hosting those at right now. I'll have to scare that up and share that with you guys. But this Temple of the Sun and that Temple of the Sun are very similar, but the difference is with the free version, it's not deluxe and it's not available in print. You'd have to grab a copy and print it out yourself. And it is it is explicitly stated that it's for the AD&D rule set, and I can't obviously sell AD&D books. Wizards of the Coast will curb stomp me, as they have shown absolutely no legal hesitation in getting litigious these days. So yeah, I can't sell the AD&D version. So this is a version that is available for both Castles and Crusades and Osric, and and you can pick that up. So it looks like we have Ty Beard here. Ty Beard connected to audio. Good afternoon, sir.
Hey, can you see me?
I can't see you yet. We can see your name, so we know it's you.
All right. It's probably a configuration issue on my side. Let's see here. I don't have my technical crew, so
Oh, your IT crew isn't there today?
Yeah, that's my daughter's.
Yeah, I have watched your live streams with Nick Ricada, and I think you have an absolutely fantastic IT department.
I do too.
So,
well, shoot. I wonder why this isn't working. Hang on.
All right.
Okay, I know why. Got it.
All right.
Okay.
There you are. Good afternoon, sir.
Okay, there we go.
Hello.
Yeah,
thank you.
Howdy.
Thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, when I started watching Nick Ricada's live stream, and then you started coming on as a regular guest there, I was like, Ty Beard. Now, why does that sound so darn familiar? Duh, because I played early versions of the Fistful of Toes back in the 90s.
Oh, so. Okay.
And then I was like, one of us.
Well, the first show I did, I actually had a copy of Fistful of Toes, and I even had first edition Warhammer 40K, and so
Oh yeah, yeah.
I
The
was been
the
playing this game I think since before you were born.
Rogue
Nick, to
Trader.
Nick, which wasn't quite true, but close enough. But
Yeah,
yeah.
Rogue
Well,
Trader,
good.
man. But yeah, so you're an old school gamer.
Old school. Can you hear me all right? I don't know about my
I
volume.
can no, your audio's perfect,
Good?
and
Okay.
I definitely think we can hear you. Um,
Yeah,
you know,
I started in '79, so
yeah, I is 81 when I started gaming. So yeah, we're old school. Maybe not to try and elevate myself to too high a prominence, but maybe one of these nights we could get on Nick's stream and bully him. You know, you young punk, you don't know what
yeah.
D&D is.
I'm trying to put together a traveler game with Nick and some of his friends. I want to show them how the old school, uh,
Oh yeah,
how you do old school sci-fi. So
yes.
I probably won't kill them in character generation.
I was going to
though.
say, you do it with deaths during character generation and trigonometry during space combat.
Yeah, real men. That's a real men's game.
That is, it absolutely is. There was you of course know Steve Jackson Games. They're based in Texas. You oughta. But they used to publish this comic strip in their magazine called Murphy's Rules.
Oh
Right?
yeah,
They would point out some of the odd rules, and one of the things that they indicated, one of the strips was called 16 kilobytes, 16 tons, and it is basically pointing out the fact that Traveler computers are less advanced. And this came out in like 1978. This particular
yeah.
strip
But
did.
so the funny thing about that is that's an oft repeated statement, but it's not true. Um, Tonnage in Traveler's Starship Generation System is a measure of volume, just
Mhm.
like it is for cargo ships.
Right.
And so it wasn't literally 2,000 pounds. It was, just an amount of space. And 1 ton is roughly, a meter and a half square. Okay. So, four by four. So a workstation with a PC would be a ton,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and they never, and the computers never stated their capacity or anything. So I always thought, obviously Traveler was written right before the microcomputer revolution occurred.
Mhm.
And so, like sci-fi authors up to that point, Mark Miller, was assuming that computers would be mainframes, going forward in the future
Sure.
and all that. So, but yeah, that was that's really not entirely correct.
Yeah.
The
Well,
way the computers worked is kind of wonky. You have you shuttle programs in and out of them and this kind of crap. It's
yeah.
very very 70s in that regard.
Yeah, the mental image of someone grabbing an 8-inch floppy drive out of a Shugart disk drive and running across a starship deck to put it in another one always
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
loomed when you think about the computer
Yeah,
operation.
you could buy in the first edition. You could buy things that were called jump cassettes. There were tapes that had the jump coordinates for one use only. So, so
I
there
believe it.
there are some fascinating retro stuff. Oh, the thing about it is, with science fiction role playing games, lower tech is better because if the player characters have got cell phones that can communicate anywhere on the planet and can look anything up on the internet and have access to real time satellite coverage, a lot of the adventures and stuff kind of become rather boring.
Well, that's why I've said that 1989 is the absolute ceiling that you should use if you're running a modern Call of Cthulhu game.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go
Yeah.
past 1989 because otherwise people are like, well, I'll just go to the university library computer and look up X, Y, and Z because in 1990 this service was available, even if
Yeah.
it was dial up. So you
I've
lock
never
it into
run
the
a
80s.
modern Cthulhu, so I don't. But that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It just gets too much information is bad for players. They're such children; they don't need to be told.
Absolutely, and the capacity thing, I explain that to my player. It's the same in AD&D. It's like, well, why does this weigh so much? It's not, okay, so you want to take the carpet that I said is worth 2,000 gold pieces out of the vanquished king's castle. Okay, that's 5,000 GP weight. Well, wait a minute, it's just a carpet. No, it's
Yeah, but it's big.
yeah. I also said it was 12 feet wide and 40 feet long. So, You know, it might not weigh 500 pounds, but it damn sure will feel like it after you've lugged it across the countryside for a few days.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Well, that's they'll push the envelope.
poor
Players will.
poor players don't understand abstraction, and
No.
it's up to us stern but fair game masters to
Yes,
teach them.
yes. Firm but fair. I think my players would agree with that.
Yes.
One of the greatest moments in Traveler history was when they were looting this ship, and they come across a room, and there's a dead guy there, and he's got a fully charged plasma gun,
Hmm.
and they're like, "Oh, plasma gun!" And Greg, one of my oldest friends, goes, "Oh shit." That means there's something in this ship where we're going to need this plasma gun.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, Nirvana for a game master.
Yes. Yes.
And there was something in the ship that required the plasma gun.
There you go. I've got a pretty eclectic group I run a game for on Monday nights from 10 to 1 Eastern, and half of my group are like us. They're neckbeards, the old school gamers going back to like the early 80s, late 70s, and the other half are people who, while they've gamed, haven't necessarily played first edition AD&D, which is what we
Right.
do. And they're like, yeah, we need to press on, we need to keep going, we need to keep exploring. And the veteran half of the group is like, look, we just found a room with 40 dead goblins in it, torn to pieces and arranged in a weird symbol on the floor. We have one Cure Light Wound spell left. It doesn't matter that we're all healed up and everything's cool. We need to leave. We know what kind of a DM Bill is. We need to leave now. So,
Yeah, I started running a first edition D&D game for my two daughters and their young men,
excellent.
and one of them is running a fifth edition campaign, and he's never really seen how the old school stuff works. And the way all this started was my daughter came in and she said, "I just spent an hour and a half generating a character in fifth edition." And I went, "Really? Takes that long?" "Well, yeah, I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, let me show you how to roll up what was it? It was a cleric. Okay, let me show you how to roll up a cleric in first edition AD&D." And we timed it. It took almost 5 minutes. And she's like,
There you
"Oh my
go.
God, could Father, could we play this?" I said, "Sure."
Oh
And
man.
I gave them the speech that I've given I haven't run a lot of games lately, but whenever I run a game with new players, I give them the speech, and it's like, "Okay, I need you to understand something. You're in a sandbox." That's the term they came up with 20 years ago to describe it.
Hmm.
That means I'll kill you. That means there's stuff you can run into that will kill you dead. Now, you probably won't, just die out of hand. You'll probably have the opportunity to run away. But, do not assume that because you encounter something, you're capable of taking it on. And when you get down to a point where you're beat up and in danger, it's up to you to decide to leave.
Yeah. I think one of the worst
Yeah,
one of the worst things that ever came along to D&D, and this goes back to third edition, was the CR, the challenge rating.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, here's how to perfectly balance every encounter. So, your play. Oh, come on, man. Look,
Well,
I'm not going to send
yeah.
I'm not going to send a huge ancient red dragon after a first level party. But my God, if they climb the mountain,
Oh, yeah.
where
There's
it's
a 10th
rumored there's
level
a
of my standard dungeon where they could find something like that.
yeah,
And they, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And of course, I generally resolve all doubts in favor of the players. They need that. But, but my monsters are tough, and occasionally people die. I think that's one of the most regrettable things is that if there's not a genuine threat of dying, there's no drama.
yeah,
And I'm not saying game masters ought to be bloodthirsty or anything like that, but if the players aren't in genuine fear that their character could be killed, it's not as much fun.
yeah, yeah.
And that goes completely in tension with all the storytelling crap and all that stuff.
Yep.
You know, but as I like to go, oh yeah, well you should try running a first level magic user in AD&D with 1 hit point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, you get a whole D4, but you could roll 1.
You could roll a 1.
You know.
If the dice
yeah.
gods are with
Well,
you, maybe you got that little con buff and you get a +1 or +2 on that die. You
yeah,
know,
yeah. I always gave them maximum hit points at first level because again they needed it,
sure.
and I let them re-roll ones when they'd roll hit points because it really does suck to gain a level and roll it once. Like Empire of the Petal Throne had an interesting system. You re-rolled all your hit points at every level. You couldn't lose hit points, but you could obviously gain some, which I always thought was kind of interesting. I don't think I ever actually did that, but that was an oddball mechanic.
I had the first edition EPT for a couple of years, and I picked it up for a very 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 low price. I think it
Ooh,
is 80. No, it was $100 shipped, and that is phenomenally cheap. Like today, if you
yeah, I
had
was going to say, I bet you were able to make a profit on that if you sold it.
I turned a profit, but not by today's standards. Like today, if I had
Yeah,
a copy and I sold it, um,
yeah.
it'd be
If I had
just
only thought of the implications of all of us gamers getting into our 40s and 50s and having disposable income,
yeah.
I would have bought up everything, kept it in the shrink wrap. I would have.
I'll tell you, this is the most heartbreaking no shit there I was story about owning classic D&D items, which I think the fates have more than reciprocated. I think I've gotten so much cool stuff, it almost takes the sting out of it. There was a huge comic book shop and game shop here in the Orlando area called Enterprise 1701. And I went in one day, I was with my buddy Matt, and I was looking for some BattleTech stuff and some comic books. And I hear him, he kind of chuckles and calls me over to the front counter. Under the glass, there is this funny looking Dungeons and Dragons box about yay big. And it looks like it was put together, made with brown shelf paper. And they wanted the
Oh,
princely sum of $50. This was in
oh.
1991. And he said, you said your
Well,
budget today was $50. You want an old copy of D&D? And D? And I laughed and I said, no.
Pshaw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Well, the
that is
internet.
literally a case of I could have sent my kids to college with if I had
The
bought that.
internet. The internet is good in the sense, especially eBay and stuff, that you can now get anything from
Hmm.
your childhood if you've got the funds.
Yeah,
That's good. But what it's also done is it's wiped out all those bargains because back in the day before the internet, you'd go to a convention and they'd have an auction and you'd pick up something that today would sell for hundreds of dollars for $10.
sure.
And it wasn't because of people selling it were stupid. It's just that that was the only market was that auction.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and you go to used bookstores and find $5, $10 stuff. And so that's been that's the trade-off for going, hey, I remember that game. I wonder if I can find it somewhere. And
yeah.
there it is.
And there used to be a used bookstore close to us. I was talking about the fates kind of giving me a little pat on the head after turning down that. I went in. I guess it was probably around 2007, and I picked up a true first print Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, and Dungeon Master's Guide. I mean the ones that were released, bam, right there in the first year with all the weird printing errors and stuff. And I knew the lady that owned the shop because I frequented it a lot. And I said, "What are you asking for these?" She said, "Old D&D books are $5 a piece." So I picked them up. I now have a true first print Dungeon Master's Guide that has fewer pages than the later prints. The Monster Manual that's got the trademark applied for stamped right
Oh
on the
wow.
cover in reference to
Trying to
AD&D.
remember. My player's handbook has the wizard. No, it has the
The Demon Idol.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, the TSR logo.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
what was the first logo?
the
I guess
first
it was the wizard.
the first logo they were using. Let me grab this real quick. I got to geek out about this.
Yeah.
Um, Fortunately, it's just over
The satanic logo. I can't remember when that one came along.
the satanic logo. I talked about that on one of my shows
Mhm.
a while back. This
Yeah,
the
that's the one I've got right there.
the lizard logo.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
The lizard logo. Then they switched over to the wizard logo, and that caused a kerfuffle because of the Satanic Panic. So they said, "Oh, okay. Well, here's something that's non-offensive," and it was the
Moon.
profile moon face, which
Yeah.
yeah, the same people, were like, "Oh, that's super satanic. That's extra satanic."
This was a time when people would actually play albums backwards on their turntables
Yeah.
to hear. I mean, it was just a different time. I showed my daughters the old Dark Dungeons chick tracks. I actually have some of those tracks somewhere. But
Oh man, that's great.
I worked at a hobby store that sold gaming stuff when I was in college, and a buddy of mine was a high school teacher, and he brought me some of the tracks because some lady showed up and was handing them out. He was also our DM, which was kind of awkward. I asked him if he invited her to play in his game, and he said, "No, I didn't really get around to that."
Well,
But different times.
my parents, unfortunately, in the 1980s, got wind of that and turned a very gimlet eye towards D&D, and yet they were absolutely thrilled that at the age of 7 I picked up Tolkien.
Yeah, yeah.
They're like, "Oh, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis are awesome." And then later when I get D&D, like, "What is this? Wizards? Sorcery?
I remember.
Demons?" Thanks,
I live
Mom.
in
Thanks,
East
Dad.
Texas, and East Texas is a somewhat conservative place. And I
Sure.
remember when Brianna, my oldest, she was about 5, I guess. Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter were at the theater at the same time, the
Hmm.
first movie in each series. So I was going to take her to a double feature, and she was all dolled up in her little dress, and we went by Sam's, the grocery store, to get something before we went to the movie. And Brianna would talk to anybody. She was just a beautiful little child. And this lady says, "What are you going to? My daddy's taking me to a movie." And it's just, "What movie?" She goes, "Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings." And this one goes, so, so we'll go see the movies. And after it's over, I said, "Brianna, honey, let's don't talk about going and seeing these movies at Sunday school tomorrow. Let's just don't mention that." And she says, "Why not?" That was her favorite response to anything I said. "Why not, Daddy?" I said, "Well, because some people think that because you see a movie that has magic in it, you'll actually think magic exists. And of course, we're not supposed to believe in that." And
Sure.
she gets this real perplexed look on her little face, and she goes, "Don't they know it's just a movie?" I said, "Apparently not, honey." I said, "Please just don't." And that particular Sunday, our pastor at the biggest Baptist church in East Texas said, took the podium. He said, "I've been hearing a lot of stuff about these two movies. I haven't read Harry Potter, but my children have, and they love it. And I read Tolkien. I love Lord of the Rings. It's a great story." And I mean, and shot the whole thing in the head. And I was like, I love this guy.
We had a very 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 similar experience at church. We went one Sunday. It wasn't so much speaking to moral panics about the Lord of the Rings, but we were sitting there, and along with the biblical lesson of the day, uh, our pastor started basically working into his lesson the friendship of Sam and Frodo. And
Oh, that's cool.
my wife, whose parents are, and I mean, our pastor at the time, he was not like some young hippie guy. He was in his 60s, you know.
Oh, wow.
But so he'd been in like seminary school when the Lord of the Rings was first published in the U.S. And my wife, who her middle name is Arwen. I married an Arwen
Okay.
because her parents were huge
Nice.
Tolkien fans. I am the husband of Arwen, the brother-in-law of Galadriel, and the father of an Eowyn. So it's
Wow.
and
That's
and,
impressive.
and an Elbereth, lest I catch flack for not mentioning that. But yeah, as soon as that came, Colleen and I were kind of nudging each other, like, "Is this great or what?"
Yeah, you crazy kids have no idea some of the things your forebears had to go through.
Yeah,
My parents were My mother was a beauty pageant contestant. My father was an athlete. So so what are y'all doing on Saturday nights? I mean, shouldn't you be out, I don't know, drinking and getting girls or something?
Yeah.
It's like, again, different time, but it was funny. I started playing D&D right before the Satanic Panic occurred,
Mm-hmm.
and my aunt actually took issue with it and told my mother about it. And my mother, I'll never forget, she said, "Here's what I know. Every Friday and Saturday night, he and his friends are here at the house in our garage playing that stupid game. They're not out driving, they're not out drinking, they're not out getting in trouble. So I'm good."
Yeah.
And so the driving and the drinking, all that other stuff happened a few years later. But
Sure. You gotta.
So my parents they had a very conflicted kind of view of it. It was weird. But see, the thing is, in the late '70s, you had to have something to scare your parents with. And at that particular time, satanic crap was sort of in the. You remember the big Rush album with the big pentagram on the front, and there was the backmasking thing, and Kiss was just the most weirded out, crazy thing that parents had ever seen. One time, one of my uncles, who was a combat veteran in World War II, saw my Kiss poster. He just went, "What the hell is that?" I can't imagine the frame of reference.
I didn't storm up Okinawa so you could listen to that crap, kid.
Yeah, I'm like, it's a band. They sing music. I said, sort of.
Well, they more
Yeah,
yell
I was a
it,
smart
but
when I was
yeah.
in high school, but yeah. Well, these great uncles I had were very. I had three of them. Two were World War II combat veterans, and one was Korea. Well, actually four. I forgot one of them. So three World War II, one Korea combat veteran. So these men were important to me. Losing face to them was not something that I
Sure.
We took the Kiss poster down. After that, I didn't want to get into it.
No, I completely understand.
But that's what I mean. Back in those days, though, every generation's got to scare their parents.
Yeah.
And you listen to some of the stuff back then, it's like it's quaint compared to what it's like. Oh yeah, I remember when I thought that was cutting edge, and now it's like, isn't that cute? but yeah, and of course TSR. My God, the marketing coup that all the attention they garnered was amazing. I mean
that I tell you, I was lucky enough to know and be very good acquaintances with Gary Gygax. I hesitate to say friend because not because I didn't really appreciate and enjoy spending time with him when I got to spend time with him, but friend carries a lot of weight, You never want to overestimate yourself in someone's opinion. But I'll use lowercase f friend with Gary Gygax. And he told me the first time that I interviewed him, Bill, they had to buy the books if they wanted to burn them.
Well, that makes sense.
He said after that 60 Minutes interview, first of all, the 60 Minutes interview was a hack job.
Of course.
They spent, and either Morley Safer or Mike Wallace, I don't remember who. He said, we spent the better part of a day walking around Lake Geneva. He asked me questions about growing up. He was just, awestruck by how nice the town was, and it is a very nice little town, Lake Geneva. We spent
and then a hack job on
we spent like 30 minutes with them filming me in my office, and they'd ask me a question that the answer was no, and they'd ask me a question that the answer was yes, and if the yes fit better than the no, they edited it together like that. He said, but our sales took off.
Yeah, it was, it was we call it the Streisand effect, I guess now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there were a lot of kids that got into D&D because that's cool.
Yeah, I got into it because everybody in my elementary school played it. So
Yeah, and it was just it was a strange time. That ran its course, though, at least around here. It ran its course pretty quick. There were, but
well, I think
the parents were just maybe not quite as dumb as they were in other places. I don't know.
It's different people, but moral panics about D&D seem to have raised their ugly head again,
Uh-huh.
and it's
I actually think the demonic people have got a better argument, actually. Though, I mean, okay,
yeah. If you're worried that I'm going to hell because of the Ifrit cover of the Dungeon Master's Guide, you can point to things in the Bible about turning away from the appearance of evil and not inviting, not having satanic idolatry and that sort of thing. And okay, you can make a point, but if you're telling me that not having representation in a module from 1978 is triggering to you, it's just cartoony nonsense coming out of your mouth.
isn't it though? Isn't it though? I was over on an H.P. Lovecraft Call of Cthulhu Facebook page, and someone did another one of the posts. H.P. Lovecraft was a racist, and I posted, "So what?" I figured I'd probably get thrown off it. I had over 100 likes in like 10 minutes.
I can believe
what do
it.
you know? People are finally getting. I don't care if someone's triggered. I never agreed to assume the liability for someone else's mental health. I got my hands full keeping my mental health,
Yeah.
in order. And to me, it's the ultimate presumption. You have to change your behavior so I don't feel bad. Well, you know what? Go, commit an act with yourself that's illegal still in a lot of states. It's yeah. Which brings us to this lawsuit, I suppose.
Which brings us to this lawsuit that does dovetail nicely.
Yeah.
Now don't think you've gotten away from talking about the ins and out of A Fistful of Toes. We're gonna.
Oh no,
we're gonna
of course not.
And I have to put this disclaimer here because you never know with people, folks. When I say toes, I'm not talking about a fistful of disembodied phalanges that belong on the end of someone's foot. Tube launched, optically guided, wire controlled. It's an anti-tank missile. Look it up on Wikipedia.
It's a game. It's a pun, sort of.
It is a pun.
The naming convention started out this way. Over the years I've designed any number of games that none of which were published, but they're for my own use, and I always named them based off of Clint Eastwood movies.
That is a fine way to name your game, sir. I salute you.
Sure. And so A Fistful of Toes was logical. That was better than the Panzers of Madison County, I suppose. But it was a natural because if I'd ever done a supplement, it was going to, of course, be for A Few Toes More.
A Few Toes More.
But yeah, a TOW is an anti-tank missile. It's the most ubiquitous anti-tank missile during the time period the game covered.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah. But well, that's great that you actually played it. So you must have downloaded it. Did you download it when I was giving it away for free in the late 90s?
A friend of mine. I was complaining about the lack of easy to pick up modern war games. Just the ability. Hey, you take 20 Russian tanks. I'll take 8 American tanks, and we'll have a bash.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just smash our armies together, like you can do with BattleTech or 40K or something like that. And he said, let's check out this game I've heard about, A Fistful of Toes. And so we played it a few sessions, and I enjoyed it, and this would have been the very late 90s or early 2000s.
Okay.
So it would have been version 1.
Right. That was a version that I made available. Friday's still out there somewhere. What happened was I was a modern war game enthusiast in the late 70s and all through the 80s. Well, 1989, the wall comes down and the Soviet Union collapses. Great. My entire war game hobby evaporates, right?
Yeah.
So for a few years there, I'm just kind of sitting there going, crap. That was the period I most loved. And so I had this epiphany. What if we just pretended like the Soviet Union didn't collapse? We just keep playing the games that we always like to play. And I got with my buddies and I'm like, yeah, let's just do that. And we had massive armies of micro armor and HO scale stuff. I mean, and we started playing a game called Command Decision, written by Frank Chadwick of GDW. And Command Decision is, Chadwick's a very good game designer. Anything I say critical of Command Decision, yeah, precisely.
Sorry, I love Twilight 2000.
I've got nothing but respect for Chadwick, but candidly, I think he slightly missed the boat with Command Decision. It had some great ideas, some very good ideas, but the implementation was awful, in my opinion. And about that time, I went to law school. Well, in law school, your time is consumed with your. I mean, it's a high pressure, high intensity environment, and I allowed myself a once a month indulgence. I would come back to Tyler and go to our war game club that met on the third Saturday of every month, and so I'd want to play a game, and we would just agonize through these command decision games. They lasted forever. They were as bad as, I mean, it was just slow. The game actually incentivized players to not do something, because what happened was you put markers down showing whether your units were going to stay still, move half, or move full, and then once you did that, you were supposed to just do it, both sides at the same time. Well, and it's the nature of modern combat that flanks are highly vulnerable. So players that dawdled would be able to move after their opponents. And so you got into this kind of mutual slowdown phase. And the combat system had some things I didn't like. Anyway, long story short, we had a game that lasted, 6 hours and played 3 turns, something like that.
Yep.
And I was furious because, again, this was my one treat of the month. So I went to dinner with a buddy of mine, and I said, I'm not playing this again. And I said, it can't be that hard to come up with a good set of rules. And so we sat there at dinner talking about what kind of game we'd want to play. Went back to my house, cracked open a few beers, and that night I had an outline form of what I wanted. I wanted a game that I could put as much micro armor as would fit on the table. I want to be able to fight big battles. I wanted game turns to last maybe 15 minutes once players were familiar with the system. I wanted all data on one line of a sheet of notebook paper for each vehicle. Let's see, what were some of the other things? Troop quality had to affect everything. That was a bias of mine. And
sure.
Of course, many games today do that, but that was quite a cutting edge deal in the late 90s. So anyway, we sketched it together. I went back to law school and spent a week when I should have been, studying for class, and put together the first draft, and went back to Tyler the next weekend, played around with it with some micro, and went, wow, this thing's going to work. And we polished it. And right now, Fistful of Toes 3, which is 500 pages, now most of that's data, okay?
Sure.
But it's still the same game. I mean, the armor system has almost unchanged. The infantry and artillery systems have been modified, but the idea with Fistful of Toes was, I said, okay, what's the most important thing we want to simulate? What's the funnest part of the game? Well, that's tanks shooting at each other. So I spent most of my time and energy refining and smoothing out the armored combat system. What's the second most important? Well, probably infantry. Okay, infantry is more abstracted. Artillery, more abstracted still. So the less important it is to the tactical commander, the more abstracted and simplistic it is, because the idea was, we're not going to design a kitchen sink game. We're going to design a game that can be played in 10, 15 minutes a turn, both sides, by the way. And that's sort of how it happened. Well, so we played the heck out of it at our game club, and loved it. And then this thing called the internet came along.
There you go.
I was in a Usenet group, and I mentioned that I had written a set of rules, and somebody said, "Ooh," I said, "Oh, okay." So I polished it up a little bit, put it out there for free, and the next thing I know, people started playing it. And then Paul Minson, who's a good friend of mine, he contacted me and said, "Hey, I'm an MIT material science engineering grad, and I've helped develop other games. I'd love to work with you," because I had said I would love to do a commercial version, but by that time I was out of law school and working for a living, and so I called him up, and we got along famously, and so we just started working on it, and we released Fistful of Toes 2, and then 3, which was kind of our magnum opus. We're amateur game designers, so we put everything possible in the book. That's why the book is 500 pages long.
Sure.
Game is still every bit as playable. If not, it's actually simplified in a lot of ways from the original version. And Rand Corporation uses it, so that's kind of cool.
That is cool.
This is pretty funny. So one of the guys that plays the game, he's very active on the Facebook group. We had a Yahoo group. We started like in 2000.
Mm-hmm.
we had like over 1,000 members of it. And so we were doing the whole game designer talking directly to the players stuff long before that became standard. But anyway, he was on there. So he sends me an email one day and says, "Hey, I'm an analyst with the Rand Corporation, and we'd like to use your rules. Do you have time to talk about it?" I said, "Well, yeah." You know? So I get talk. He's former Army officer working for Rand, and he was tasked with developing a manual war game to help the Army refocus on maneuver warfare after almost 20 years of fighting basically light infantry battles.
Yeah.
And they gave him the specifications, and he said, I can design a game, but there happens to be a commercial product that would fit this to a T. And they said, "Oh, okay, we'll go." And so he said, "Do you mind?" I said, "Well, no, of course not." I said, "You don't actually have to have my permission. You can just buy the game and play the hell out of it." He said, "Well, we like to be sure that the author is good with us." That's fine. And if you'll get a GSA contract, we can buy from you. And I went, "Oh God, no."
Yeah.
I'm not doing the paperwork for a GSA contract. But anyway, so yeah, that was, for a gamer, that's pretty much the nirvana, right? I mean,
yeah, it is
serious. He had to tweak it, I'm sure, to do, but it was very, very flattering.
Sure. I mean, it certainly has to be better than Steve Jackson Games' Raid on Iran.
Yeah. Well, it was one of the more interesting little games. I seem to remember Murphy's Rules on that, where you couldn't shoot across the street.
Yeah.
I assume it was an area movement game, and you did combat inside the area, probably.
Well, I mean, it's one of their Snapcase games. It strikes me as one that may have been like we started designing this on Friday night, and came in with hangovers on Monday morning and said, "Did we write this?"
And then Reagan gets elected, and they release the hostages. So
yeah. Yeah. But
yeah, those were some interesting times. You could design a game on nearly anything in those days.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was. Yeah,
it was the best of times.
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. But yeah, so we've kind of moved into an era now where, again, it's the moral panics that you and I ran up against back in the day have been replaced by brand new moral panics created by a bunch of screeching people who really should get different hobbies and leave us the hell alone.
In most cases, they should seek help because they're obviously, it's like we've got a gigantic mass mental breakdown.
Yeah.
And people, somehow there's currency gained by being more mentally ill than the other people in your social media group. It's crazy. The difference was in 1982, when all this crap started about Satanism, TSR continued to sell D&D. They continued to sell it. They didn't change it. They didn't. I mean, they're like, "Oh, that's interesting. There's a moral panic. Big deal." What's happening now is the companies are responding to these cranks on Twitter, and
yeah. I mean, imagine if you had bombarded TSR with one-sentence letters like 5 times a day. I know a bunch of the guys who worked at TSR back in the day. They would have literally been like screaming, doubled over with laughter at that. Now, it's how you change an industry, and that is completely, pardon my French, fucked up.
Well, here's the thing. I'm a business owner myself. I own my law firm. And I'm not going to have any random idiot on Twitter tell me anything about how I'm going to operate my business. If they want to come sign the lease, to my office. If they want to reimburse me for my tuition at law school, and all that, then maybe we can talk.
Sure.
But the idea that some idiot on Twitter that I've never talked to, that I've got some obligation to pay attention to them. Back last year on Nick's show, we had to talk about this. Somebody in the stream asked the question, how do you talk about this case that I'm involved with? How do you talk about this on Twitter? And I said, you don't. I said, look, if a random person walked into my house off the street and started yelling at me about something, I would either shoot him, hit him with a baseball bat, or call the police. Okay? I mean, and anybody would.
Yeah.
why on earth would you let random people that you don't know walk into your social life just because they happen to be doing it electronically? You have no obligation to pay attention to random cranks, either face to face or online. And somewhere along the line, I guess it must be our wiring in our brains. Something about something about social media that seems to compel us, human beings to participate. But you know, that this stuff about first of all, if I'm going to make business decisions based on what some idiot on Twitter says, I kind of want to know, are they actually a customer? Do they actually influence a whole bunch of other people who are customers? Because if the answer to those questions are no, well then shut up and leave me alone. I mean,
Well,
and I don't know why companies have such a hard time these days doing that. And segueing to that lawsuit, it seems very clear to me if you take the factual allegations in this lawsuit as accurate, and I kind of think they are. They're pleading this in federal court, so you wouldn't typically lie about the facts. You might strain the legal arguments back and forth, but as far as what actually happened, that's probably a pretty fair assessment. And it seems very obvious to me that if those facts are clear, that some social justice loons got a hold of it and decided they were just going to cancel Dragonlance for some
let's
inane
let's
reason.
choose that as our entry point and dive into it. Now, the one thing that
Yeah.
I've beaten on, and I don't know if you've watched any of my previous live streams, um, there's two facts overwhelming that are relevant to this that you should know about me. One is I am not an attorney and I have no business discussing actual legal ramifications, and the other one is I am terrified of the court system. I haven't done anything bad. I just
Good.
never, it just
Well, you
I
know,
am I'm a stormtrooper. You guys are Sith lords. Okay.
well, that's an unfortunate comparison that might have more of a basis in truth than you might think. Well, and I want to make it clear too. I'm not. I'm an attorney, but I'm not either of the party's attorney in this case. I'm not anybody's attorney that I'm talking to.
Sure.
We only have Hickman and Weiss's side of the story because
Just so.
so Wizards of the Coast has got 21 days from the date they're served to respond. So that day should be coming up. The suit was filed on the 16th of October. Who knows how long it took to get service to their registered agent, da 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 da. But sooner or later, we ought to have their response. That's going to be very, very interesting. Um, I got to say this. I think Hickman and Weiss have a very good law firm. I thought the petition is pled very effectively, very well. The feds require you to plead with specificity. So, like in Texas, you file a lawsuit, it's sufficient merely to put people on notice as to what you're suing them about.
Mm-hmm.
Federal rules require a little more detail, and I thought this was very thoroughly detailed, um, to the point that someone that's got no familiarity with Dungeons and Dragons or anything else, a judge can follow this. But yeah, it's and again, everything I'm going to say is I'm taking the factual allegations in this complaint as though they're true.
Okay.
So that's the big caveat to any comments.
Sure.
And anything I say, I don't know any of these people. I don't know any of the people at Wizards of the Coast. Uh, you know, so anything that I say about motivations or what they were apparently trying to achieve is, of course, just an opinion. But we're allowed to give that, I think. First one. So yeah, I read it. It's. I have seen things like this happen in other businesses, so I find the allegations to be very credible or plausible. It's really funny. So I don't know, have you talked about this at all on your shows before?
I read some of now. You talk about how well that's put together. I mean, even a tool wielding monkey with opposable thumbs like me, I could read through that thing. And once I got past the party of the first part in parcel to the party of the second part, who hereafter shall be referred to as the party of the first part.
Yeah.
Once I got past that and started reading about things Dungeons and Dragons and things writer like author related, it was really actually easy to follow.
Yeah, here's one of the ways you can break down a lawsuit pretty easily. I'm trying to make sure I get this on the camera.
Oh
This
yeah,
is something I sketched out,
he has a
right?
map. Awesome.
It is. So at the top here is Wizards of the Coast, right? In the
Okay.
middle is Hickman and Weiss, and at the bottom is Penguin Random House. And so basically, let's see if I can get this angle right. So basically, Wizards of the Coast licenses, the blue is the legal agreement. Wizards of the Coast license the intellectual property to Hickman and Weiss. They have a contract, a separate contract with Random House to write a novel. Random House pays them money. They send some of that money back to Wizards of the Coast. There's also a side arrangement that is alluded to but not described in much detail between Wizards of the Coast and Random House. Not sure what the terms of that were exactly. It had something to do with the permanency of the license, that this wasn't going to be something that could eat. I would imagine if I'm Random House, the one thing I want to be certain of is that Wizards of the Coast can't just yank that license arbitrarily if I'm going to be printing out 10 million books or whatever.
Sure.
So that's but basically, you've got three parties and you got two contracts that really matter. And what Hickman and Weiss are saying is, look, we complied with every provision of the licensing agreement, and we also complied with every provision of the Random House contract, and Wizards of the Coast, you breached, which also prevented us from getting any of the benefit from either of these contracts. And that's the essence. Yes, that's the essence of their complaint. If I were doing an opening argument in this case, I'd be drawing something like that on a whiteboard, walking the court through it, saying this is how it plugs together. But basically, what happened was Wizards, I guess, decided to relaunch the Dragonlance stuff. I actually have never read Dragonlance, but I have it on good authority. It's a great series of modules and, books. We sold the heck out of it at that hobby store.
There you go. I mean, you can't argue with the dollars.
But so one thing that I don't have that I would love to see is the licensing agreement itself. Apparently it was attached to the pleadings, but every copy out there that I've been able to find of the pleadings don't have that. From the representations in the complaint, it appears it was a very well done licensing agreement. It had very specific milestones that the authors had to make. Wizards had the right to approve, but they were under a requirement to act in good faith. They had to give them an opportunity to cure it. If we don't like this, we have to be specific about what we don't like. You've got a time period to do it. We're not going to arbitrarily, do that. And what I think is potentially very devastating for Wizards of the Coast, that's how it worked for a good long time. Courts are going to look to the written word of a contract, but they're also going to look to the actual conduct of the parties. And so if there's terms in the contract that can be interpreted multiple ways, well, you look at what the parties actually did to determine which interpretation you're going to go with. That's the first. You have rules of interpretation, but that's the critical thing. And from the timeline that I sketched out from the pleadings, it looked like Wizards knew. So Wizards, all the agreements get done in March of 19. March 21st, I think the Wizards licensing agreement, and March 23rd, the publishing agreement is done. So Wizards at that time, according to the pleadings, had an outline of the stories and approved it. And then basically, so in June, 3 months later, Hickman and Weiss deliver a full outline to Wizard, and Wizard approves it. That's the other part of this process. This required back and forth constantly between the parties. It's going to be very interesting to see how Wizard gets out of that. I mean, they approved it. Then 5 months later, they deliver a manuscript to the book publisher and to Wizards, and Wizards approves that. And apparently there's an approval system that Hasbro has, some kind of electronic approval system. All that's going to be trackable. So you've got the parties acting in conformance with this contract for almost a year. And then, actually longer than a year. According to the complaint, Weissman and Hicks met all contractual milestones and got approvals at every stage from Wizards of the Coast. The contract stipulated Washington state law, which is why they're filing in federal court in Washington. The interesting thing about Washington state law is I've actually had a recent arbitration that I won for a client that was under Washington law. Washington state is one of the states that imposes a duty of good faith and fair dealing on all parties to a contract. And what that means, a lot of states do that, and the definition varies between party to party, but basically it just means you got to act right. But in Washington, that duty is much more affirmative. You can't do anything to damage the other party's ability to enjoy the benefit of the contract. You know,
Right.
even if what you're doing is not covered by the contract, this duty of good faith and fair dealing kicks in. You damn sure can't sabotage the contract. And I think, again, taking all these pleadings as being accurate, I think that's going to be a real problem for Wizards, because it very clearly, if unless these guys are lying through their teeth in a federal lawsuit, and I don't think there are, Wizards definitely acted in bad faith, because what Wizards did apparently was they came in and said, y'all are in breach. And the plaintiffs say, how? I won't talk about it. You're just in breach. Very high-handed. And they're alleging that they stood to benefit to the tune of $10 million or more from this arrangement. In addition, they're alleging that Wizards interfere. The Weissman and Hicks will apparently do a payment from Penguin Random House. The payment wasn't made. They're alleging that Wizards of the Coast contacted them and said, we're going to terminate the contract, don't pay them. So they're alleging what's called tortious interference with contract.
Interfering with somebody else's contract.
Like if a competitor comes up to someone and says, hey, do business with me instead of that other guy, that's not tortious interference. Tortious interference is inducing a third party who's part of a contract to breach that contract. And this is pretty much textbook if it happened the way they said. What I find remarkable to me is the fact they had this meeting with the lawyers present, and the lawyer apparently tried to buffalo them by saying, we're not moving towards breach. And they call it out in the pleading, say it's nonsensical. Yeah, it is totally nonsensical. I don't know. One thing that's not clear in the pleadings, and maybe you have some insight on this, what did Wizards have to gain by terminating Dragonlance? What was the big deal?
Okay.
There's all kinds of innuendo in the complaint, but no real, they did it because of this.
I am offering up my non-legal gamer opinion. Anyone out there who's taking the side of Wizards of the Coast, who wants to perform lawfare on me, back off. This is a gamer's opinion that I'm offering here. I think okay, so Wizards of the Coast has performed some missteps in the eye of the woke crowd.
Yes.
Wizards of the Coast, they won't cancel old Dungeons and Dragons. You know, that was a thing that blew up a few months ago. It's 2020. 18 years ago.
I'm familiar with some of that crap.
6 days ago. A person on Twitter, we go back to Twitter again. One guy on Twitter said, wow, Oriental Adventures sure is problematic. And this is a book that was published in 1983.
And was published by people who knew a lot about Oriental culture. It's not disrespectful in any way.
So Wizards of the Coast went through, and everything from 4th edition back, if you go to the various PDF and print-on-demand houses, now there is a big disclaimer at the top of those catalogs that says, blah, 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 older time, blah, 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 does not represent current thoughts, and so on.
Let me guess, the woke people weren't satisfied with that.
Well, probably not. Probably not.
They never are. They never are. That's the takeaway. You cannot satisfy the lunatic woke mob.
No. Now, prior to that, there was an issue going on. Boy, howdy, this is a rabbit hole, but I'm going to try and lead us through it as quick as I can. Wizards of the Coast contracted an individual who had a, shall we say, checkered past.
That's talked about in the complaint. Is that Kelman guy?
Well, I'm actually talking about a different guy.
Oh,
But
another one.
we'll
Okay,
we'll get
yeah,
to him.
yeah, yeah.
But
They mentioned that Wizards is in this, woke storm.
Woke Storm, I like that. So the
Yeah.
Woke Storm that they were going on, this guy that they contracted as a consultant on Fifth Edition had some spousal abuse issues pop up. The folks on the internet allege that Mike Mearls at Wizards of the Coast, when he was getting complaints from these people, was giving their personal information to the person that they were complaining about.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's true or not, but it caused a big kerfuffle. So
So he allowed. Let me get this straight. He allowed an accused to know who was accusing him.
yeah, it's shocking.
Oh my God.
What kind of nightmare dystopia do we live in?
Right. And by the way, that's how you'll stop this stuff.
Yeah.
If everybody would start doing this, that'd go a long ways right there. Letting these people hide behind anonymity is a very, very short-sighted strategy.
So the woke crowd alleges that Mike Mearls was filtering this information to the consultant in question. And there was another guy that they hired that people didn't like because he's very much a free speech advocate. So, as you say, Wizards of the Coast was in the middle of a woke storm, and so this other fellow that they actually discuss in the book, the legal proceedings, which seems like a small book, the complaint. He was basically appointed without any consultation with Hickman and Weiss. Just, that other person who was sensitivity reading your documents, just saying those words puts a bad taste in my mouth, and I'm out of cider. But their sensitivity reader that they had, that apparently they got along with and were flexing with to change things to the tune of like 80 pages in one instance, was without ceremony replaced with this guy, and that's when things seem to have hit a wall. Now, again, as a gamer, not as a legal talking guy, I question using this guy because
didn't he have some unwoke things in his past too?
Well, that's just the thing. There are certain behaviors and attitudes that the unwoke will put up with. As long as you're on the right team. It's like, football team looking the other way when their star player drives drunk.
Principles and intellectual consistency are for the little people.
Yeah. So this guy writes a book that some allege, I haven't read it, I'm not going to read it, I'm not going to read about it, but some people allege has pedophilia romance in it.
Oh, they call him out in the girls a paean.
Exactly. So this guy all of a sudden is calling the shots on what is and is not acceptable in the manuscripts that he's getting. And I think
it seemed to be a mismatch, to say the least.
Little bit.
Yeah.
So I feel like Wizards of the Coast, either this guy really got deep in their ears and said, Weiss and Hickman aren't woke enough, this will hurt us. Or when they brought this guy on board, the shitstorm about what he wrote started, and realized that having his name associated with this might taint everything, and in a panic move, rather than move him out of the way and move another sensitivity reader in, just pulled the plug on it. That's my opinion.
Seems awfully, and again, the standard disclaimer: we're taking the plaintiff's word for all the facts.
Sure.
And we're also assuming the plaintiffs have provided all the relevant facts.
Mm-hmm.
If you turn up an email where the plaintiffs had said, said something they, something horrible. But assuming the plaintiff's version of the facts is basically correct, this was an incredibly high-handed move. Okay, look, it was a breach of the contract.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the licensing agreement, again, taking what the plaintiff says for true. But just from a business perspective, who in their right mind walks in and says, okay, we're nuking your contract, goodbye? How do you not expect to get your ass suit off if you're going to cost somebody millions of dollars? What sensible business people do is they say, listen, this thing's turned toxic. Let's discuss working this out. We'll pay you something reasonable for your time and your energy and your lost opportunity, and we'll all sign a non-disclosure agreement. Everybody will move on. Life will be good for everybody. According to the plaintiffs, they just walked in and said, we're terminating you. Except that the license agreement apparently doesn't allow them to do that. And so it seems to me to be a high-handed move by some witless buffoon somewhere. Now, that's my opinion.
Sure.
I don't know this guy. I don't know the management Wizards of the Coast, but I'm not impressed based on this. I mean, this is an incredibly amateurish, rookie business move. I can't believe Hasbro would tolerate one of their subsidiaries letting their folks do this. If these folks, if Hickman and Weiss are even 75% correct, I predict a very, very large settlement is in their future. Because here's the thing: if this is a woke hit, Discovery will turn that up. Because woke people can't keep their mouths shut. They got to put it all in text messages, and they got to put it all in emails, and they got to send writing back and forth, and all that's discoverable. So, if I were Wizards of the Coast, I'd be trying to buy my way out of this lawsuit, and I'd fire whoever it was who thought that they could walk in and bully someone to the tune of $10 million.
I concur.
That kind of money at stake, I guarantee you they could find representation.
Let me tell you something. The thing, when I first read through that online the first time back in October, I made the comment, and I stand by this. One of the most contentious things I've ever read about court-wise in RPG history was when Gary Gygax left TSR. If you want to talk about reading something that'll bring tears to your eyes of frustration,
God, that was that was nuclear lawfare.
And anger on Gary's behalf. The man wasn't a saint, but he didn't deserve that.
No, he just pissed that woman off, and she went after him with a straight razor.
Even in spite of that, he took the Gord the Rogue character, supporting characters, the name of Greyhawk, the name of places in Greyhawk, and they still let him publish Gord the Rogue books.
And try to put him out of business.
They did try to put him out of business, but he was still able to publish those fiction novels. So, in that context, how screwed up does Wizards of the Coast have to be doing a worse job at managing a couple of authors than TSR was in handling Gary Gygax, as awful as TSR was back then?
Take off the point. If I'm a shareholder of Hasbro, I assume Hasbro is a public company. I haven't checked. If I'm a shareholder of Hasbro, here's what I want to know. How did you let some idiot terminate a deal that would have made the company millions and millions of dollars? How did you do that? And get us embroiled in a nasty public lawsuit? Again, you buy your way out of contracts. You don't walk in and go, we're going to breach and good luck to you. Because, it's basic negotiating, right? You've got to make a deal with somebody. You have to make them an offer they can't refuse, to quote The Godfather, right? I say that to my opponents all the time. Okay, you got to make me an offer I can't refuse, or we're not going to settle this. Or I got to do the same to you.
Right.
And we laugh about it, but that's the deal. Now, I know what I would have advised a client on these facts. I would have said, okay, first of all, if you walk in there and say, you try to trump up approval clauses that are that tightly written into the right to unilaterally terminate a contract, we're going to lose because it's not legally supportable. Not only that, it's going to be very embarrassing publicly. And It's such bad faith. I don't know if Washington law allows for punitive damages or not. You typically don't get punitive damages in contract disputes. But of course, tortious interference is a tort, and you can get punitive damages there. That'd be another fact I'd want to know too. You didn't call Random House and poison the well with them, did you? Oh, you did. We need to get their counsel on the phone and we need to settle this. I suggest that we start out at $1 million and payable within 1 day of signing the settlement agreement.
Yeah.
In fact, if you just give me a cashier's check, that'd be good.
Yeah.
And they're not going to take that, but we got to start somewhere. But we deal with them in good faith and we shut this down. But apparently somebody at Wizards of the Coast thought they could walk in and breach contract that would cost someone $10 million and they wouldn't be able to do anything about it. If that's what happened, then that guy's an idiot. Just that simple.
Yeah.
Their in-house counsel, again, if assuming these are all accurate, I've heard lawyers say stuff this stupid. We're not moving toward breach. You just said you're going to breach the contract. That, by the way, is called anticipatory breach. If you and I have a contract and you come to me and say, I'm going to breach the contract, I'm entitled to just go ahead and sue you for the breach because you've already told me you're going to do it.
Sure.
I don't have to wait for you to damage me. And I don't know, just something about the way the petition is put together. As I said, it's written very well. It's very carefully drafted. I saw almost no typos. I mean, this is a really good. I mean, they got good lawyers, in my opinion.
It's a good read, and I got the vibe from reading it that they lucked into. Well, I don't think they lucked into. They probably didn't like flip open the yellow pages and put their finger on a name.
My guess is they probably had relationships with this guy. I mean, obviously they must have made a lot. I'm sure they did very well on the previous Dragon. That's the other thing too, right? If you're going up against people who have assets and resources, you're especially not going to get away with something like this because they can hire lawyers. But, on these facts, I'd be trying my level best to settle this thing and get rid of it.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's in all likelihood, 95% of lawsuits settle. So in all likelihood, there's going to be a settlement. But I can promise you one thing, it'll probably be a lot higher and more costly than it would have been if you'd gone in and dealt with them in good faith instead of trying that really chump change amateur night move. We're the big bad company and we're not going to perform and there's nothing you can do about it. Oh, well, we'll see about that.
Yeah. Now, you had asked about Hasbro being a publicly traded company. They are. I was just glancing over here. Their market cap right now is 12.04. And that's a lot of money to me. I mean, if you gave me 1/10,000th of that, I'd be rolling around in it Scrooge McDuck style. But in corporate terms, that's nothing. Apple could swallow them up and not even realize they'd done it. They could do it as a clerical error. But the point is, the money that this deal would have made Hasbro for a company with a 12.04 market cap, I literally think right now there is some suit at Hasbro just pounding Tylenol and coffee going, start from the beginning. You did what?
Yeah. No, I've been in another case where it would appear that a very similar situation, gigantic public company owning a small niche business that damaged my client. And it was very obviously something done by local talent. And, and it puts the parent company in a tough position, right? They have to, as basic leadership, you've got to support your subordinates. But when your subordinate walks you into an embarrassing $10 million lawsuit, then in all likelihood, I would assume that, the plaintiffs in this case are business people. It's just a matter of money.
Sure.
Okay. What if we offer you $4 million and you don't have to do another thing for us? But the idea that they were just going to walk in and terminate this contract with no consequence. I don't know if I'm doing a good job of explaining this. The point is, you never put someone in a situation where they have nothing to lose by suing you. That's the stupidest thing you can possibly do. And that's what happened here apparently, because they said it's over. We're not going to give you anything. Well, that works in the movies, but it doesn't work in real life. What you do is you say, I'll offer to settle this today on these terms, but if you file suit, deal's off, and we'll just have to fight. You put, you give them something to, you give them some reason to not file suit and to negotiate. And again, now, this is all presuming that this is a complete and accurate accounting of the facts. We find out that the plaintiffs had sent the CEO a letter calling his parentage into question. That may change things a little bit. Maybe not, though. I mean, from what they're saying about the license agreement, it appears to have been a very well drafted licensing agreement. Very clearly defined milestones, reasonable oversight by the licensor, but not the ability to just trump up a license. It would have to be that way. No company like Penguin Random House is a large book publisher. They're not going to commit to spending millions of dollars promoting and printing these books without an assurance that the licensing agreement can't be arbitrarily yanked away.
Sure.
It will be interesting to see if they get dragged into this suit somehow. I don't, the facts don't suggest any angle.
All disclaimers applying. I mean, I would almost hope that they would on Hickman and Weiss's side.
Well, yeah, they're apparently in breach of their agreement with Hickman and Weiss.
Okay.
Now that breach was there again, according to the plaintiff's side of the story. They were told by Wizards, this is, the allegation, that they were supposedly told by Wizards, we're going to yank the license. At which point, Random House said, well, we're not going to pay you this payment that's due, because yanking the license would be a breach. We don't have to perform, it's a, so maybe it's a deal where if I were Random House, what I'd be saying to Hickman and Weiss is, look, don't, that's between y'all. You get this worked out, we'll still be here to publish, but don't drag us into your scuffle. You came to us with a publishing deal. The licensing was all handled. If you fall into fighting with a licensor, y'all, And if I were the plaintiffs, I'd probably try to honor that, because
yeah,
you're going to have somebody to publish this stuff. But yeah, this is inane. I don't know. It'll be. I look forward to actually seeing the licensing agreement.
I want to too. As not great as my understanding of nuclear lawfare is, I really want to see it.
Well, it sounds like a well done agreement. I want to put it in my file. Yeah. You always look for well done examples of stuff, to work from. That's part of the profession. And another thing that's troubling, I did mention this earlier, but I want to reiterate. I think Wizards has got a real problem in that the parties were pretty deep in performance. In fact, they say that they received money from Penguin Random House, and per the contract, paid some of that back up to Wizards of the Coast.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to argue? If these facts are accurate and complete, you're not going to win on, we had the right to terminate because we didn't approve it. There's no way that licensing agreement would allow that big of a hole in it. I mean, assuming that you had a lawyer, with more than a year's worth of experience.
And apparently,
them, yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's 2 7/10 novel length books are complete. At what point during this process, despite you signing off on enough shit that we had corrected, did you come up with this cockamamie idea of...
No, that sounds as speculation. This is personal. I mean, this has all the hallmarks of a personal issue.
Sure.
They got crossways probably with that guy, would be my speculation. And he got pissed off, and maybe there was some angle in this to offer them up as sacrificial lambs. Maybe their politics personally aren't sufficient, who knows. But none of those things are going to justify the breach of a contract. And the scale of damages is, so in contract law, if someone breaches the contract, your damages are what you would have gotten net had the contract been performed. So it will not be sufficient to say, well, they worked for a year. This is a fair this is a fair payment for their year of work. No, that's not what that. That's a standard of damages that's appropriate where you don't have a contract and people just kind of agree to do stuff, you know.
Right.
So I think that plaintiffs are going to have some interesting challenges. They're going to have to prove that $10 million number, and the way you prove that is with expert testimony. You bring in publishing experts. You might even bring in Penguin Random House people. You know, you subpoena projections. You know that's the other thing. You got to imagine somewhere buried in the files at Wizards of the Coast there are going to be pro formas showing the expected performance of this product. That's very strong evidence right there of what the damages are.
Yep.
You know, and I tell clients all the time, you know, if you typed it on a computer, it can be found. It's just that simple. Don't
Yep.
ever lose in it. And boy, I certainly wouldn't want to play any games in federal court anyway. So I think, you know, based on the pleadings, looks to me like that they've got a genuine complaint and stand to win this one, and maybe punitives, because I mean, at some point, calling and telling Random House that you're constant that's just being a dick, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know,
You know, that's just being a dick, and that's exactly what tortious interference, you know, is
exactly.
designed
That's
to do.
like
So
the textbook.
I wish them
definition.
luck. I don't have any great regard for companies that knuckle under to wokeness. So I wish Hickman and Weiss luck. I do think, you know, if y'all are watching this, I think you got good lawyers. You're doing your real good job. I didn't see anything in this complaint that I said, "Ooh, we shouldn't have done that." But yeah, and the duty of good faith and fair dealing in Washington has teeth. That's not a small thing. So
Yeah, it's Ty. It's so. I like it. It's like 13-year-old me trying to figure out college algebra. How could they think this would work?
Oh,
How
listen,
could they think?
you can't strategize against idiots.
I mean, if it
Can't.
was me, if it was Bill Sylvie, if they came to me and said, "We like the work you did for Frog God, write a module for us," blah blah blah. Oh no, we don't like it. Breach of contract. We're breaching the contract. Bye. I'd just be like, "Oh shit, man." But this is why these people
Yeah.
have 40 years of dealing
The
with
best-selling
gaming
fantasy
companies and
stories, maybe
writings.
outside of Tolkien. I mean, these are not. That's what I'm saying. You know, you sit there. You know, we're the big bad wizards of the coast. Well, here's the thing. After a certain relatively small point, having additional money and assets doesn't help you in business litigation. You know,
And like you
I
said,
don't know. You know, yeah,
like you said, when you go after people with nothing to lose,
yeah. You're going to eat a year and a half, almost 2 years worth of work. Say nothing of the loss of credibility, because obviously, had they not filed suit, you know, Penguin Random House is going, "You people are flakes." What I mean, you know, they're. So I mean, you know, they almost had to sue them. And for someone at Wizards of the Coast not to anticipate that is criminally negligent. Well, not criminally, but catastrophically negligent. I'd fire a lawyer in my firm out of hand if they advised a client to act this way.
yeah.
You know, on these facts, taking
And-
all this stuff as read. I mean, because that's just, you know, you just don't do that in business.
And
But
oh,
here's where this woke shit comes into it. When you believe that anything you do is utterly morally justifiable, you can talk yourself into stupid things like this. They don't deserve this license because they're evil. So we don't have to give them a dime because we are morally justified. Well, the legal system hasn't caught up with that concept yet. If Hickman, certainly they've pled facts sufficient to win. Jury demand too. That's going to be glorious. Although a Washington jury might not be quite as friendly to them, but again, basic senses of fairness. I mean, I'm not sure what, you know, if these facts actually occurred the way they said. Summary judgment. Summary judgment is what you do when you're in a lawsuit and basically you win as a matter of law. It's not necessary to go to trial because all the facts are established. They're stipulated to, they've been admitted by the other side or something like that. And so you say, "Okay, Your Honor, we win. There's nothing for a jury to do. A jury determines the facts in a lawsuit. The judge applies the law, the jury determines the facts. And so if these facts are complete and accurate and the other, then it may not go to trial. It may be a summary judgment thing. I just can't imagine that you walk in and say, we're going to terminate a contract with millions of dollars at stake and you're just going to have to like it.
Yeah.
And that attempt by corporate counsel to bluff was just sad. That's pathetic. We're not moving towards breach. No, you're breaching.
Yeah.
You just said we're breaching. What they tried to do is what's not clear from this too is it appears maybe that Hickman and Weiss were at that meeting without their lawyer. And they got ambushed. Now, all of my clients understand. You walk into a meeting and the other side has their lawyer there. You pick the phone up and call me immediately and get me on the phone, or you walk out because you're about to be ambushed. And that could have been what happened too. They got all their lawyers together, and we're going to go in and we're going to scare them. Yeah, right. Lawyers are nowhere near as scary as they think they are. They're just not. Certainly not to people with 40 years of publishing experience, New York Times bestseller lists, perennial. I mean, we couldn't keep that stuff in stock at that hobby store I worked at. We sold the hell out of that stuff, and we sold the paperbacks as well. It just appears that somebody at Wizards dropped the ball really bad.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. They threw the ball over the fence. It went down the alley and down the gutter and into the storm drain. Because now, all that caveat said, I was thinking about something. What facts could exist that would actually justify Wizards acting this way? Can't really think of what they are. You'd have to have a whole history of Weissman and Hicks saying, no, we're not going to make any more corrections. And there might have been some of that. But if I were their lawyers, I would have mentioned that in the pleadings. I would have drawn the stinger. I wouldn't have left that out. But even so, apparently, the licensing agreement has a very elaborate, structure there. And again, it would have to be. You can't do a business deal this side and let anybody just unilaterally terminate it. I mean, that's not Random House wouldn't have agreed to do the transaction if that licensing agreement wasn't bulletproof.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, but that's my take. I hate to see something like this because the fans are the ones that ultimately will suffer. They're not going to get something that they really, really wanted to read.
And you bring up an interesting point about the fans, and this is something that I honestly don't think. Okay, this is Bill Sylvie philosophy BS. So if it's discountable, please say so. Here's the thing: the super uber woke crowd, generally speaking, doesn't buy the things that they move into and infect and take over.
No, they don't.
Comic
they
book
jump
sales,
to the front of the line with no credibility.
Comic book sales are in the toilet, and yet comic books move to the beat of moral busybodies nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
If all the
we've let the hall monitors that we used to give wedgies in elementary school, we've let them now determine business marketing strategy.
And they
I think we ought to give them wedgies again. Send them on their way.
Dragonlance kept TSR during all their business malfeasance in the late 80s and early 90s. I guarantee you Dragonlance kept them afloat. Now, I am a diehard Greyhawk fan through and through. That's my bread and butter for AD&D, but I absolutely acknowledge the primacy of Dragonlance, and it went into 3rd edition. It went in a little bit into 4th edition. I mean, they're not talking about, we came back after being gone for 30 years. They came back after being gone since the early 2000s. There are legions of Dragonlance fans out there. People who were clamoring for a conclusion. This is like
Yeah.
This is like Ballantyne dropping the ball on Return of the King on J.R.R. Tolkien, right? So it astounds me that Wizards of the Coast might look at this little tiny shrieking crowd of moral busybodies on social media and say their cachet is more valuable to us than people who literally grew up playing and loving Dragonlance and the novels and the video
can
games.
now afford to pay whatever you're going to do.
And can now afford to pay whatever.
You know, at one point, my wife was giving me a hard time. You know, another game order arrived at the house, and I didn't have time to get it into my collection. I said, "No, I've already had that." And she's like, "You know, buying a lot of games." I said, "Honey, we pay more for our country club memberships each month than I spend on all of my hobbies." You know, when you know, as an adult, these you can afford to pay it. I'm going to go out on a limb and predict that this really was just a bitterly personal squabble between people. I don't. Anything's possible, but I just can't see Wizards of the Coast deciding. I could see them terminating the Dragonlance contract, but I can't see them going in saying, we're going to terminate it and there's nothing you can do about it, which is effectively what they did. That's just not how you do business. And it's not going to work, as this lawsuit very amply demonstrates. You know, and like I said, the discovery, everything related to this is discoverable. Emails, instant messaging, text messages. I mean, all communications throughout their company that has anything to do with Dragonlance, that could have anything to do with Dragonlance. Guess what? You could turn that over. And that stuff is not particularly privileged. It's not automatically privileged anyway. You know, and of course, even if it's privileged, what you do is you amend your pleadings and put it in your pleadings as an exhibit. So I mean, the point is that I just the embarrassment alone would, to me, argue for some kind of. So, say it this way: there's no way on earth that had some sensible lawyer inside of Wizards said, "Look, we're going to need to buy our way out of this contract. It's going to cost us several $1 million." No way he gets shouted down by rational managers, by rational executives. They say, "You think it'll cost that much?" "Yes." "Why?" "Well, they're a year and 9 months into doing this. Our own performers were projecting our take of this was going to be X. Their take would have to be that." That's their damages. You know, I mean, they're going to hang us with our own projections, quite likely. You know, what we have to gain, though, is we can drag them, you know, we can put them through a 2-year lawsuit and we can drag them through the mud and they can be paying lawyers. So there's benefit to them in resolving this quickly and quietly.
Yep.
They're, you know, I would think that they would be willing to come meet us in the middle between 0 and 10 million, somewhere. And that I can't imagine advising a client to do what they did on those facts. Never, just wouldn't do it. I've had to get clients out of contracts before that we were absolutely caught dead to rights on. And you negotiate. You don't go in like a bull in the china cabinet. You know, had a co-pack arrangement one time with a client where we agreed not to do something and had an opportunity to do that thing and make a ton of money. And they're like, "We don't care what it costs. You find us a way out of this." And I'm like, okay. Problem is, you know, it was a very well drafted, very comprehensive co-pack. And I called him. I said, "Look," I said, "you know, we're going to lose if we breach this contract unless they hire really stupid lawyers. And we have to assume that they'll hire a lawyer at least as good as I am. I could win this case hands down. So we got a deal." Well, okay. And we called and we negotiated our release from that contract. It cost us some money, but we negotiated our way out of it. And that's the typical course of action in these things, you know. So no, that I think of all the things that I was most appalled by as I was reading this, going, who does this? In the real business world, what kind of an amateur would go in thinking this would work, much less actually try to pull it off? So I wish him luck. If you know if this thing is 80% accurate, I wish Hickman and Weiss all the luck in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I
Especially
I
on
have no dog in the fight other than being a gamer, but yeah, I if Wizards is dumb enough to not sit down and say, look, what's it going to cost us to make this go away?
yeah.
I hope Weiss and Hickman drag them from Seattle to Kansas City and back.
Well, they would have. I mean, that would have been a material fact to have left out of these pleadings, right? I mean, I opinions vary between lawyers, but as a business lawyer, 24 years doing this, my opinion is when you draft pleadings and stuff, if you're going to go into detail, draw the stinger on the facts that don't work for you, because the other side's going to point them out anyway. You might as well get the first shot at laying them out and explaining why they don't matter. I would be very surprised if there are some serious, truthful, material negative allegations that they didn't plead. It would be inconsistent with everything I've seen from these pleadings.
Mm.
But yeah, that but I was saying earlier, you can't strategize against stupid people. That's something that I have to explain to clients all the time. The whole idea of strategy is predicated on the assumption that your opponent will do what's in his best interest as he sees it. Well, the definition of stupid is someone that hurts themselves and hurts others.
Yeah, that's
So
why it's
therefore,
it's
yeah,
so hard to defend against kamikaze attacks.
no, that's it. I mean, but I've had clients, why did they do this? Because they're idiots. Yeah, but why? Well, because idiots do stupid things. Now, I don't. Again, I only know half the story. I only know the plaintiff's side of this. So there could be some facts, but I sit here and try to imagine. Can't imagine any facts that would exist that would not have been mentioned in these pleadings, because if they're accurately talking about the licensing, if they're accurately reviewing the terms of the licensing agreement. Remember, the court has a copy of the licensing agreement because they attached it. Why on earth would you misrepresent something you're going to file with the court? That would seem to be foolish. No such facts could exist because they.
We broke up a little, Ty. Uh-oh. Nuts. We're kind of losing Ty here. All right, let me see. Crap. Well, guys, I hope Ty's able to come back. Oh, wait, we lost him. Let me, he dropped. All right, let's see if Ty is going to be able to join us. But I mean, I hope everyone is so far has found this as informative and really focused as I have. This is some great information that we've gotten from Ty. So we'll see if he's gonna. Hopefully he'll be able to hop back on. Okay, he's rebooting. He'll be back in a second. And he'll be joining us hopefully. Oh, he got hit. Windows update. Oh dear. So while we're waiting for Ty to come back, just I'll ask the trivia question real quick, um, and I'll wait till the end of when we do this webcast. I'll see if I get the trivia question answered. The trivia question this week, and this is the last time this week I'm going to ask it. I'm going to ask a new one at the beginning of next week if nobody guesses it before the end of today's live stream. What is the name of the dragon that is mentioned in an illustration in S2 White Plume Mountain? It's not statted, it's not an encounter, but it's mentioned on an illustration in S2 White Plume Mountain. Tell me what the name of that dragon is, and you win the miniature giant miniature crayfish. So yes, you will get this awesome miniature giant miniature crayfish. You will send me your mailing info and I will send it to you. The name of the dragon in S2 White Plume Mountain. Just pop that in private message, or if you get it into open chat before anyone else, I will have that on hand, and I can declare you the winner. So we'll see about that. This has been a great live stream with Ty. I'm enjoying it. Hopefully he will be able to come back. I'm gonna put this Zoom window. You guys keep seeing the controls there. I apologize for that. Back over here. Over there. Oops, that's not what I want. So Tracy, ready for the event tomorrow? I did not get. I was a little disappointed because I did not get the books. I have the Lost Crypt books, but I was hoping to get Temple of the Sun, and also they didn't get here in time. I'll arrange another way if people still want. Signed copies of Temple of the Sun, or if you just want to buy a physical copy of Temple of the Sun, I'll figure out a way to get those out, whether it's an event or what have you. But as a quick reminder, just for those of you who might not be aware of this, we have an event tomorrow. It's a signing. Tracy Lesh and I will be signing copies of The Lost Crypt. Tracy will have prints of his artwork there also for sale. And in that collection of art, you will be able to buy some previously unreleased original Dungeons and Dragons artwork. That is art that was created for original D&D, but not published. So this is classic D&D art that has never been seen except for a brief glimpse. That and here comes Ty. Except for a brief glimpse that Tracy gave online. Hey, you're back. Well, your voice is.
Can you see me?
I can hear you.
Okay, let me see why we're not. Okay, now we'll leave the meeting. Hold on. Yeah, I wound up in one of those hells where I had Windows updates that were queued up.
Oh, so, beautiful.
Yeah. It was, yeah, I was like, oh God,
Thank you, Microsoft.
Yeah, you really suck, Microsoft. I hate you.
Yeah, no kidding.
Okay, well, I'm looking here.
There you are.
Okay, there we go.
All right.
Oh, good Lord. It was literally as easy as pushing the start video button.
That's okay.
Sorry.
That's
What
okay.
are you gonna do? Well, anyway, I don't remember where we left off.
Oh, dude, we had, I think we had just solved all the world's problems.
Yeah, yeah, probably so.
Yeah. So
Wishing Weiss and Hickman luck.
yeah, it's luck I don't think they're going to need because I
No,
think this is fairly
no,
direct.
I think I'd be. I know what I'd be doing. I'd be on the phone with opposing counsel, proposing a settlement,
Yep.
and I'd be doing it sooner. And that may explain why we haven't had an answer filed yet. Um,
Yeah.
sometimes if you think you're going to actually resolve something, you'll extend. You'll agree that the other side can extend their filing deadline. Because I mean, if you can settle
Right.
it, why spend the time? You know, coming up with a detailed
Yeah.
rebuttal. So
I
but
I
yeah,
no, I was just going to say that really the outcomes, the two outcomes that I hope for is again that Weiss and Hickman win this if they are in the right, and the other is that just because of internet blood sport, I hope we find out all the salacious details. I want to know what went down.
I think we're going to do that if they don't settle. I think that discovery is going to come out one way or another. Because another thing I think, and again commending their attorneys, they wrote these pleadings for normal people to read,
Yep.
and so I mean they're keenly aware of the PR battle. It seems so. I think that that I just can't imagine what on earth would have made you thought you could get away with this.
They're stupid.
I guess.
Like you said,
But
you
I mean,
just said it.
apparently
Stupid
they had
people
attorney,
don't.
they had inside counsel in there, they had management in that meeting. I mean, this wasn't just one stupid person doing something. Apparently, it was a group. Of course, groups can be stupid just like individuals
Sure.
can. But I don't know. So we'll see.
Was it Tommy
I
Lee Jones said in Men in Black? A person is smart. People are panicky and dumb.
Well, yeah, and of course, in-house counsel they've got numerous competing things they've got to manage, right? They work for the company, so
Yeah.
they have to, you know, they can't get too carried away in opposing management. If management says we're going to embark on this course of action, you know, they're kind of stuck with it, or they don't last long as corporate counsel.
Yeah. Kind of lashed to the mast, as it were. And if the captain
Yeah,
says,
sure.
I'm taking us up on those rocks.
Okay, maybe I'll try to do. Yeah, I don't know. I just I've never been in-house counsel anywhere, so I don't know I only know it from third hand. But
Yeah.
I think on that deal is at some point the lawyers had to have said to them, guys, we're going to get our asses sued off, and we're probably going to lose. I mean, I don't know on these facts. I don't know how in the world you actually say this is how we're going to win this case.
The only thing I can think is that
You know,
I don't know. I mean, and does this exist in modern law where you get like danger hairs with law degrees?
oh yeah, oh yeah.
Maybe they got
Uh,
danger hairs for attorneys.
It's a real problem with the millennials coming into the practice of law. Our legal system is adversarial. That means you hire a lawyer, I hire a lawyer, and our lawyers fight it out, and somehow the truth emerges. And we've had problems. I've gotten a few lawyers fired, and I don't like to do that. I didn't set out to do that, but because they were so completely feckless and didn't understand how to simply pick up the phone and call somebody and negotiate. They tend to be very uncompromising. They're confrontation averse, so they won't talk to you. They'll file stuff instead of just picking the phone and calling. I mean, and I'm generalizing. There are some very good millennial attorneys. We've got one in our office. I mean,
Yeah.
So but I'm just saying that there are generational characteristics that make millennials less than optimized for the practice of law. And I'm getting it from some of my doctor clients that medicine is just about as bad, and that ain't a good sign. I never even
No.
thought about that.
that worries me as I get older.
Yeah, no kidding. You know, but it's staffing more than the doctors themselves. I haven't heard him criticize the doctors, so you know, but the staffing is just a constant thing.
Yeah.
The only millennials we have on staff are my two daughters. So, and they've informed me that they identify as Gen X. So, you know,
Right on, man.
yeah,
You're
leading edge of Gen X.
absolutely. You know? That's great. That is great to hear.
Yeah,
I mean,
you know, we just stayed on the sidelines and watched the world burn. We don't.
yeah.
There aren't enough of us. You know, you get this giant clot of boomers and this giant clot of millennials. In the middle, you got the Gen X guys just kind of rolling around going,
Yeah. Yep.
But
So
yeah, I mean, this does definitely smack of a bitterly personal feud. That oftentimes in business disputes, when you see really high-handed conduct like this, it usually boils down to somebody didn't like somebody else, and you know, and I, you know, I have no idea. For all I know, the plaintiffs might have deserved it.
we'll see.
But I think it's very unwise to drag your company into a $10 million plus lawsuit.
Yeah, I said at the start.
Feelings.
I said at the start of our dive in, you know, and I think all rational people who aren't in law practice should be a little bit afraid of the law and court systems. I'm not denigrating lawyers, but that leads me to a very funny.
Feel free to denigrate them. I do all the time.
That leads me to a very funny point. You and I, well prior to this, had some 6 degrees of separation interaction that you may not remember or even have necessarily been aware of, but had it unfolded. Well, I'll just tell the story. So there was a case that you were involved with, an issue with Frog God Games a few months ago. I have worked for Frog God Games. I think the world of them. I think they're great people over there. They've published some stuff of mine, and will hopefully publish more stuff of mine. I commented on the case on a web forum and deliberately skewed my opinion so as not to appear to be speaking out of turn. And
Right.
I said, I think X is probably the way this is going. That my thinking was, I think X is the way this is going. So I'm going to imply that I think it's Y, just to stay above it all and nobody to ever come back and say, Bill Sylvie said this. So I said, I posted that. And there were people for Frog God Games watching social media to see who might have been stirring up shit. And somebody asked Matt Finch, somebody said, hey, I told Ty about this forum post. Who is this guy, the Dungeon Delver? And Matt kind of laughed and he said, no, I know that guy. He's fine. Trust me. He's
crazy, but
he's crazy, but he's fine. He's not out
harmlessly
there.
Crazy.
Yeah, harmlessly crazy. Matt told me that he had such a laugh about it. He literally thought about telling you, this was after you had sent your first ever tweet to someone who was talking smack on Twitter. You sent a tweet to them, you know, we will be
welcome
in
to
touch.
The party.
We will be in touch. And
well,
he
Frog
said,
God, it was welcome to the party.
Welcome to the party.
Yeah.
He said he honestly thought about telling you to say on one of Nick's streams, which Matt and you I watched. Oh, and by the way, Bill Sylvie or the Dungeon Delver, I can't remember what, we will be in touch. If that had happened, I would have launched myself into orbit with Fear P. I literally would have just.
Fortunately, you know, Matt is a man of great discernment. Because I'd have had to do it.
I would have been running around. I just would. Colleen, we have to move to Belize. We're changing our names. You know, teach the kids to speak Spanish. We got to go now.
The thing about the legal system is civil law. Nobody goes to jail. I mean, but what they can, but it's just absolutely just pulverizingly difficult because I tell clients this: our legal system is designed to resolve disputes, short of gunfire. That's its primary objective: resolve disputes and do it in a rationally objective and somewhat
This
fair
offer
way.
not valid in Texas.
Yes, yeah.
Sorry.
But the way it but the way it does it is by being incredibly slow, incredibly tedious, incredibly expensive, both in money and time and other resources. Because, 95% of lawsuits settle, and I have yet to settle a case where someone has said, you know what, I now understand your point of view. And so now I think we can settle this. Almost invariably, it comes down to, I'm tired of paying lawyers, aren't you? And so that's the thing. I mean, it's actually a feature of the system that it's so miserable and so expensive and all that stuff that it forces people basically to be reasonable at the end of the day. But you should never go through a litigation thing if you have a choice.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean,
unless like in this case, somebody's trying to cheat you out of, trying to keep you from getting $10 million, or
no kidding.
But I mean, litigation is not a sport, and I've turned down engagements before when the client didn't have a claim and just wanted me to file suit to rough up the other side. I was like, no, I'm not a leg breaker. I, if you need to get somebody else to do that, because it's not a. For one thing, they always say, "Oh, I'd rather pay you than pay them." Yeah, you say that now, but no, it's just it's not what the system was designed for. It's really just the best way we've come up to have people reasonably fairly resolve disputes. And but it ain't no fun.
Oh no, no, I can imagine not, man. I just like I've only ever been to court once for a traffic ticket, and it was such a traumatizing experience, and it was because it was literally a fender bender. It like broke some plastic on the front of my car. Someone bumped me, and I rolled forward and bumped the car in front of me. Cop showed up. Anybody hurt? No. I'm sending a community service officer to handle the paperwork. Leaves. This guy shows up and takes 2 hours to fill everything out.
Mm.
I had just moved a week prior. My license hadn't gotten changed. He wrote down a citation for that. Fair enough. I should have got it done. I knew where I was moving to. I should have gotten it done. He wrote down that I had no valid driver's license in the state of Florida. He wrote down the description for the one and cited me for a much more serious issue. Oh. So there was a bench warrant issued for me. Because I had been driving, or according to the computers, I was driving around with no driver's license.
Right.
So I go to court, and I just, in a suit, everything, the judge came out, he cracked wise, we all laughed, he calls a couple of people up, has chuckles with them as they settle their hash. William Sylvie approached the bench. Your Honor, this is kind of a mistake, and I can explain. I didn't know it was possible to slam a piece of paper, but whatever the docket was, he went from Harry Anderson to senior drill instructor Hartman like that, and says, "Explain then." And so I had to go over to this clerk of the court who had no seats in front of her, so I'm squatting down, and he calls somebody else up to handle their stuff, so I have to whisper. And I mean, I went from, I'm just going to go in and tell the judge it was a mistake, because I've already looked up the two different statutes.
Yeah.
That I paid the ticket and everything's, it went from that to like, I was just like crushed down.
And someone else leaves the courtroom with a negative view of our legal system. Way to go, Your Honor.
Yeah,
way to go. That happens. It doesn't happen. My opinion is most of the time it doesn't happen, but it does happen. And when a judge does that, thanks a lot. You've just lowered one more person's estimation of our profession and the legal system. And of course, he's going to tell everybody he knows, And I mean, was it really worth? Why don't you just say, well, what you got?
Yeah.
I mean,
I just
did
couldn't
you
say.
get out of it? I mean, did you explain it
Yeah,
to him?
yeah. I
Yeah,
walked out of court a free man. Uh, you know.
yeah, but that's that. There, yeah. There's no call for that, and he may have just been having a bad moment. Who knows? But there's no
Yeah.
call for that. That's the thing I don't like about my profession is that lawyers find it very easy to bully people in the courthouse. Because it's a very intimidating experience to take the stand. I've testified in a number of matters over the years, and you get in that witness box, you're stuck there.
Yeah.
You're stuck there until the judge says you can leave, and this guy's questioning you, and it's not something that adults are accustomed to having to deal with, and so it's very, very disconcerting. Um, I have a rule myself. I don't say anything to anybody that I wouldn't be willing to say to them in the parking lot, man to man. You know, nothing. I have nothing but contempt for lawyers that we call it. My buddy and I, we call it hiding behind the court reporter.
Mm.
That's you know. There's just now, look, if a witness is being uncooperative and they're being an asshole, sure, bets are off. But if the other person is being rational, there's no reason to be a jackass. It rarely helps you in the case, and of course, it makes you look bad. I mean, and it's not like we lawyers need any help looking bad. Well, I'm sorry that happened to you as an official spokesman of the profession. Of course, I've never been a judge either.
It was 20 years ago, and I just made it a point to vote against that guy every
Yep.
time he came back up. And he either retired or finally got voted out.
Well,
I
odds are you weren't the only person he did that to.
yeah. There
And
there was a young lady. What killed the mood in the room? There was a young lady a little bit before us when he'd been all jokey and everything. I mean, I wasn't the first guy to face his ire. There was a young lady. She was there with this beautiful, like 4 or 5 year old blonde-haired kid. Her attorney, apparently her mother was there. This was not her first time in front of him, and I'm not saying she didn't deserve some remonstration for what she'd done, but again, we're all laughing. It's very relaxed. I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to get up there with my 2 pieces of paper. I was only half listening to it, and he sentenced her for not having something in order. He sentenced her to 30 days in the slammer right then.
Yeah, and that took his mood down too. Because
Bailiff taking this crying baby, she's screaming and crying, being taken out of the court in handcuffs,
Yeah.
and he tells her attorney, I'm suspending 29 days of that. Let's see if she will remember to do whatever it was he'd asked her to after a night in jail. And we were all just like,
puts a little more color on it.
yeah,
In my experience, judges don't enjoy that.
yeah. Oh no,
But
I don't think he got off on it, but it was clearly,
that probably put him in a pretty foul mood.
yeah.
And
And here
but
come
again,
I dressed like a used car salesman, and
well, but again, that's part of wearing the black robe. I don't have a lot of empathy for judges that act that way, because your job is to treat each person on their own merits. You're not supposed to carry that over. If you need a moment to compose yourself, you've got control of the courtroom. So we're going to take 5 minutes and go to the back and get a cup of coffee, get your head straight, whatever. But embarrassing people in public is a bad idea, in my opinion, for anybody. And it's one of the reasons why I actually support electing judges, because at least you can hold them accountable
yeah.
at some level.
Yep.
But
But
no,
anyway,
I hadn't been tasered yet, but I've gotten, I've gotten outright disrespectful with judges before when they were acting that way. And there was one time very contentious matter, and I'm sorry, the judge is a scumbag. I think he's a scumbag to this day. I won't say who he is, but we even had our criminal defense attorney up there to arrange bail when I got cited, tipped.
wow.
It didn't happen, but she was there. My law partner set her up there. I said, "What are you doing here?" Don said, "In case you get cited for contempt, because you had," said, you had a pretty full head of steam leaving the office. I said, "Well, that's probably a good idea. Just
Wow.
bail me out if you need to."
Yeah, I
But
it's all these legal shenanigans. If you go back and you look at the history of TSR, just kind of thinking about getting angry in court and this case, there was like never a long period in TSR's history when there wasn't some kind of litigation popping
well,
up.
no, I mean, you remember in the early '80s, we used to refer to them. TSR meant they sue regularly.
They sue regularly.
They were,
They went in
they were
against.
obsessive about trying to protect stuff that really wasn't copyrightable.
No, and that
You
and
know,
that
I mean,
was that was one of the things, like the Mayfair versus TSR case.
mhm.
No,
Yeah, that was,
you can't copyright how to play Dungeons and Dragons. You can copyright the presentation,
yeah,
but
yeah.
you
You
can't.
can trademark the name Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, but
You know,
six
but
stats that refer to one's physical strength, mental acuteness, intelligence, physical speed, good looks, and everything else. No, you can't. You
well,
know.
at that point, they were just turning into legal bullies.
Yeah.
They were engaging in lawfare before we had a term for it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've always wanted to do on somebody's show is talk about the Nick and I have talked about doing this, go over the open gaming license and explain why that was such a fantastically good idea. Pretty sure Matt Finch had a role in that. I think it may have even been his idea. But simply put, what the open gaming license did was it didn't really give you rights that you don't already have,
Hmm.
but it codified them. It said, okay, if you do this, you will not be sued by us. We're now precluded from suing you because we've said so. And it gave businesses predictability, because that's what businesses want. You know, business owner doesn't want to hear, well, yeah, we can sue them, we can win. They want to hear, no, it's not. There's not a problem, and so yeah, to you whippersnappers today, you don't know what it was like 20 years ago when literally there were TSR. I mean, honestly, when Wizards of the Coast bought them, I think that was a huge improvement because they really were acting like scumbags.
Yeah.
I loathed them. I didn't have any real knowledge of what was going on behind the scenes with Gary Gygax or anything, but I got sick and tired of hearing about lawsuits against people just trying to produce game stuff. Particularly when, to be candid, TSR wasn't doing a very good job of
No,
producing
they, they,
good
they,
stuff.
they weren't. They were selling what we call in computer world shovelware at that point when they got bought by
That's a good
Wizards of the
term.
Coast. Shovelware.
Yeah.
A hojillion settings, supplements for all of them, written by stables of people who I know for a fact a bunch of those people went on to do good things in gaming,
Hmm.
but literally they were churning stuff so fast that quality wasn't a stake. It wasn't something they were interested in. And if you go back and you look at Ryan Dancy's, and I'm not a huge fan of Ryan Dancy's, but some of his stories of what he found at the TSR Lake Geneva facility, it mind boggles. Again, it goes back to you can't outguess the stupidity of people.
Well, I have read a fair amount lately in the last few years about the early years of TS. I've read Appelklein's book and the others that and the books on Gygax.
Mm-hmm.
And what strikes me as, did nobody know a lawyer?
Yeah. Well, like the
I talked to a man
litigation.
yesterday who's doing a little tech company thing, and he just said, "Found you on the internet. I'd like to meet you because I think one day I'm going to need you." And I said, "Well, tell me what you're doing." And so he tells me about his business. I said, "Okay, well, so one of these days you're going to need this kind of thing and that kind of thing. I can do that for you if you want me to, and all this." But I thought to myself, what a great I complimented him, didn't charge him for the time. I said, this is good thinking. You don't really need me today, but when you do need me, I'll be around, and you know how to get a hold of me. And I told him a couple of things. Don't do this without talking to me first. Don't do that without at least shooting me an email.
Hmm.
But a lot of TSR stuff, a lot of that was just amateurs just putting the screws to one another. And if I had represented Gygax, there's no way he would have there's no way he would have been surprised at what happened.
Yeah.
Because I'd have said, Gary, this is what they can do. Now we either close that loophole, or you look me in the eyes and say, I understand the risk and I'm willing to take it.
Yeah.
And some clients will do that. Businessmen will occasionally say, yeah, I understand. I'm running the risk. But apparently Gary Gygax was shocked when whatever her name was,
Lorraine Williams.
Yeah. And the terms of their deal, he gave her control of the company.
The problem was you had this is just my opinion, and I certainly don't want to offend any of my prior guests. I've talked to folks who were there back in the day.
And there's two sides to every story, especially these kinds of things.
But the company was created and run by creative people.
Yeah.
Not by money men and not by attorneys, and it made a beautiful organic product that stands the test of time. But then you look, like, I am not fortunate enough to have an original D&D set old enough to reference this, but original D&D, Balrogs, Ents, Hobbits, and the Tolkien estate stepped in and said, you can't do that.
Well, you remember Fiend Folio, the first printing had
born. They were born into litigation. Their next effort, which a dear friend of mine who's on the chat right now, Tracy Lesh, was an artist at TSR back in the day, and his biggest project was illustrating a product that TSR put together called Warriors of Barsoom.
Oh, I've got that. Yeah.
The blue one? The little one?
No, did they do a second printing?
No, they did not. They
barely. I've got a Warriors. I'm not in my study. Maybe it is blue.
They barely got the first one done because that was in 1975, and the author had not been dead but about 21
right to use
years.
Barsoom.
Yeah, exactly. So, having not learned their lesson, TSR then published The Battle of Five Armies.
Yep. Well, they had the Cthulhu mythos in the Fiend Folio.
Okay.
Which was the second monster manual, and so here's
where I'm gonna completely geek out on you.
Yeah. And the Elric. They had the Elric stuff too, wasn't that they took that out too?
Hang on. I'm getting the book. Hold on. Let's see. So this book, Deities and Demigods.
Oh, I'm sorry. Deities and
Demigods.
Yeah, I'm sorry. What did I say? Fiend Folio? Sorry.
So I've spoken to Jim Ward, who was one of the authors here. You can catch the live stream if you scroll down through. I spoke to Jim Ward and I asked him for the authoritative reason about what happened with the Elric and Cthulhu mythos. They actually had permission from Chaosium to put these in here. The company, by the time this book came out, Gary had been exiled to California to create Dungeons and Dragons Entertainment.
Yeah.
Brian and Kevin Bloom, who were in charge at TSR in Lake Geneva at that point, said, why are we advertising some other game company in our book? Take it out.
Oh, so all that stuff about copyright was just a smokescreen.
Jim has a letter from Chaosium that says they can use those mythos. The Blooms stepped in and said, you can't, no, we're not advertising other people's stuff. And he said, but we have permission. Take it out.
And that's so consistent with everything I've read about those two guys.
And he said, at that point, Jim said, look, if you want to pull out that quickly, we advertise this as a 144-page book. If we take those 2 pages out, which if you know about printing, a page is like a gargantuan piece of paper, and it's 8 pages on each fold.
Yeah, so you can't take 2 pages out. You can take 8 pages out,
Yeah.
or have two blank sheets
Yeah,
in the book.
yeah.
Which
But if you want us to pull that out and maintain the print size, I can come up with two more
that's
mythos and put them in the book, and it'll stay the same and it'll be the same value. Nope, not worth doing. And so the book went from and they changed it so fast that the first expurgated versions of this book still advertised as 144 pages and had a thank you to Chaosium still printed in the book.
I'll have to dig mine out and take a look at it. I'd always swallowed the mythology.
It was not. It
That's
was not a copyright. This book, and I beat on this pulpit, and I will right now. This book is not illegal. There was no lawsuit. There was no, and this is a little funny. We were talking about the collectability of stuff. This saw like 80,000 copies printed of the first run. That is a massive amount of books. This isn't rare. It isn't hard to find. Ty, I've owned 13 copies of this book. I have had friends give them to me.
I've got my original one.
I found them in used bookstores. I bought them online. I've never paid more than like $20 for one. The people that sell this thing for like $200, $150, $100, and so on they're definitely making money on the gullibility of others.
or they're just sitting with it in their possession. So,
but it's not.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I kept saying Fiend Folio. I meant David.
No. I knew what you meant.
Yeah.
But they actually have when Jim Ward and Rob Kuntz wrote this, the predecessor to this, which was written for original D&D, was one of the small digest size books.
Yeah,
it was called Gods, Demigods, and Heroes.
Demigods, Heroes. Yeah.
And they had Conan. They had Elric. They didn't have Cthulhu in that one, but they did have Conan and Elric mythos in there. And so they, I don't know if the Howard estate came after them for the Conan stuff, but I do know that TSR became the official Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah, they had even a role-playing game.
They had so whatever issues they might have had were settled in due course. But
yeah, that's a gap in my knowledge because I didn't become aware of Call of Cthulhu until I was in college. So I it's easy for me to forget. Yeah, that would have the first edition of that would have been out along with the Elric Stormbringer. Stormbringer, that was the name. That was one of their basic role-playing derivative games, and I had Stormbringer, but that's a weird little game.
It is the BRP system, the in-house game engine, if you will, that Chaosium uses spans several games, Elric being one of them, but the kind of painfully ironic thing is towards the end of the license of the Elric books that Chaosium had, according to Michael Moorcock on his own website, he was not getting paid by Chaosium was screwing up the payments somehow. That's according to him. I don't know if that's true or not. So eventually either it expired and he elected to not renew with them, or he found out a way to revoke it from them. So a Chaosium Stormbringer rule set is another one of those things that will fetch a decent price. Or if you're looking to buy one,
No, I've got it.
Have credit card handy.
I've got Games Workshop did a hardback version of it, and I've got that too.
Interesting, very interesting.
No idea how I got it.
Well, you want to talk about a litigious game company?
Games Workshop.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, what I think
that's another. That's for another day.
Yeah, that's another 3-hour live stream.
Yeah, they that's one of those hold my beer memes, right? TSR is going, we're going to sue everybody in sight. GW, hold my beer.
Our Games Workshop is like, no, mate, we already have.
Yeah. I actually I had one interaction with them, God, 20 years ago plus. A little game store guy had a matter. He was selling their product, and oh God, how did that work out? He was selling it slightly cheaper than their suggested retail price or something, and they sent him they cut him off and sent him some kind of pissy letter. I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
He found out about me through Usenet. That's how. Anyway, I sent him. I replied and pointed out that they were in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. It would be best if they just left him alone. And he never heard from him again. So I can't remember specifically what they were doing was actually a violation of the Sherman. Oh, I know what it was. Since they had already agreed to sell him product, to then retaliate because he didn't sell it at the right price was an antitrust violation. If they had sold it to him originally, conditioned on him charging that price, that would be okay.
Mm-hmm.
But it was price fixing.
There was a period in the early 2000s, and they've kind of backed off of it. But there was a period in the early 2000s when Games Workshop moved without let or hindrance, like a damn Imperial Inquisition through the hobby industry.
Yeah, they were accused, and I personally think they were these accusations are credible. But they were accused of doing things like, looking at their sales data and parking a game and then building a Games Workshop stop to put a hobby store out of business, which is beyond stupid. Because guess what? It costs you the same to operate a game store as it costs that hobby store owner. They made no more money with those stupid Games Workshop stores. There were exceptions, obviously, but net, you're going to make the same amount of profit whether you sell it to someone who resells it or whether you sell it to your own operation, because you got to have the same return on investment that the hobby store owners got. Anyways,
yeah. Well, and I mean more to the point is that you're drawing everybody in for products A, B, and C. The company that makes product A says, screw this, opens a store that only sells product A, puts the store that sells B and C out of business, but
it's bad for the hobby.
It's bad for the hobby.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had this crazy idea. Nick and I talked about on one of his shows where I actually was going to put together a deal. It was in about 2007, I guess, to actually make a run at a hostile takeover of Games Workshop. I got interested in it and started reading their financials, and they were in very dire straits at that time.
Yeah, that would have been the time to do it.
I had some clients that had the heft to pull something like that off, and I went up to meet the client that I was going to run it by first, who was the critical first piece, and he had just started his own tech company. And so I wound up instead setting up an investment group and investing in his tech company. But one of the things that I was going to do, if we could have pulled this off, was shutter about 80% of the Games Workshop stores, because they were an absolute financial drag on the company. They were losing money hand over fist in those things, because basically you're selling 500,000 pounds of product through this hobby store. You put the hobby store out of business, and now you're selling 500,000 pounds of product. Except you now are in the hobby store owning business, which is not where your core competency was. And that whole vertical integration thing of manufacturing and then retailing it, that goes in and out of style in business. But as a general rule, I'm very skeptical of it. Each layer of the distribution chain has a lot of competencies that are unique to that layer of the chain. And when you try to jump to another layer, it's going to cost you money. You can't open a hobby store and run it as well as someone who's been running one for 20 years, as a general rule.
Yeah.
But it was I assume it was part of their strategy to be a public company. One of the things you got to have for your public company is you got to have revenue. Not necessarily profit, but you got to have revenue. Well, that was a great way to produce lots of revenue. We own our own stores, I suppose. But anyway. Yeah, they were pretty heavy-handed back in the day.
Interestingly,
but that said, they certainly brought miniature painting to a level of artistry that had never existed before then. So,
Ty, the only Warhammer game I play is Space Hulk. I love Space Hulk. Space Hulk is awesome. I have, for some damn 40K. Reason, for some damn reason, Ty, I have Sisters of Battle, I have Tau, I have Orcs. Where did these come from? I don't even
You probably liked them. I've got some Tau models that I just like the way they look.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
goddamn Games Workshop, man, they got me.
Yeah,
It's
well,
like
they have.
I went to the hobby store to buy some brushes and to buy some Reaper metal miniatures, and I came home with Games Workshop minis. How did this happen?
Well, I used to do hard sci-fi miniature games, and the Tau stuff is gorgeous. I mean, it fits in perfectly with a hard sci-fi universe,
which is probably why so many GW players were up in arms when it first came out in the early 2000s.
Yeah, because it looked nothing. It was very jarringly not like the rest of the.
It's very clean, universe. And the first codex about their society said, "These guys get along with everybody. They're awesome." Games Workshop had the temerity to introduce good guys into the 40K universe.
That's it.
No, it's not dark enough.
Yeah, I remember when first edition 40K came out. Warhammer Fantasy had existed as a box set with the 3 obligatory books, and it was enjoying moderate success. They had a supplement box with 3 more books, but anyway, 40K came out, and I opened that thing. I was like, "What the hell is this?" I mean, it was so beyond and so different from anything that anybody was doing. So, God,
Rogue Trader was awesome.
Is it a war game? Is it a role-playing game?
Yeah, it's like they can never set. It's like your character can do this and your character can do that, and you'll have a game master that does it. Oh, cool! It's a war game. Here's how you build an army. Wait a minute.
But we take all that grimdark stuff now for granted. But man, in 1987 or 88, whenever it came out, you'd never seen anything like that before.
Yeah,
nothing. I mean, and all that really that Geiger-inspired artwork, it was just like really amazing stuff. I played second edition 40K for a real long time because it was the last actual set of war game rules that GW created. It's actually a really good skirmish war game system. I actually wrote a Traveler version of it, just with Traveler weaponry and stuff.
Nice.
It's got everything you need in a skirmish infantry war game system. After that, it became much more gamey.
There's a point where abstraction just takes all the color out of things.
The thing I want to see in any war game, get back to Fistful of Toes, is I want actual real world tactics that work. I want those to work on the tabletop.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, that's with second edition 40K. If you used basic infantry tactics from World War II on, you do very well in the game. But when the third edition came out, they got rid of Overwatch, the ability to shoot at your enemy while he's moving, and it turned it into basically Panzer Blitz.
Yeah.
The term Panzer bushing from, all infantry tactic. You couldn't use bounding Overwatch. You couldn't pin them with fire. I mean, basically now it just became it was just a game. It might as well have been an abstract. Might as well have been chess. It wasn't an infantry combat game with cool weapons anymore. And so that's, to me, the mark of a really good game is the tactics ought to be intuitive, and if it works in real life, it ought to work on the table, unless you got a real good reason why it doesn't.
One of the games from the 70s that TSR put out, and I wish I'd been able to hold on to the rules. I just money crunch, and I eBayed those off. They put out a game called Tractics.
Oh yeah.
Which was
one of the authors of Tractics joined the Fistful of Toes Yahoo group, Mike Reese. Which I'm geeking out on him, going, "Oh my God, you're the guy that did Tractics!" And he's like, "Yeah, I really like Fistful of Toes." Oh my God!
That just feel great when one of the old TSR guys steps up like that?
It was one of the earliest sets of rules I ever bought.
Yeah, and it proves out your thesis that good rules work regardless, because Tractics... I don't know
if I go so far as call Tractics good exactly. It was more of a way of life.
Bear with me.
Okay.
But Tractics covers like everything up to early 1970s armor when it was published.
It is, as far as I can tell, it's the first set of miniature rules that had post-World War II rules.
Mm-hmm.
maybe WRG, their original set of rules, maybe came out before that. But I've been trying to actually. That's a little minor obsession of mine, is to own all of the old miniature rule set from. But but anyway, if it wasn't the first, it was the second, because it had a modern supplement that covered World War II to 1973 ish. The one I bought. Of course, I came to gaming in '79, so I bought this about 1979, and the box had one of those crappy old TSR 20 siders. You remember those?
Yep.
Okay. And of course, they just crammed it in the box, and so it warped the box. So my copy of Tractics has got a bulge in it on the box. I'm never going to sell it, I don't think, so it doesn't really matter.
Right.
But when somebody looks at it, what happened to your Tractics? It came that way.
Yeah. I sincerely wish
Now, Tractics for the time was actually a very comprehensive game, and like I said, it was very complete too. It was a
I
good
love
way
the
to learn
data
about
cards, like all of the different data cards you
all the
got.
sheets,
Yeah.
and the sheet. In fact, I recently scanned it because I thought about trying to play it again, but I don't want to. I don't want to dog
Yeah,
my
you know, it's
copy. So I gave
Cheeto
it to my
dust on
daughter
your.
to scan, and I'm going to print out our copier basically and bind it. So also bigger. The
Yeah.
older I get, the bigger is better. Um,
Yeah, it's like reading my AD&D books. When I was a kid, like this was crisp and awesome to read, and now I'm like,
did you ever see first edition Chivalry and Sorcery?
uh, I honestly don't think I have.
You would remember it if you did. So first edition Chivalry and Sorcery was apparently typed on a typewriter, and they shot down 4 pages to make 1 page, and they printed it. So the type is something like 4-point courier,
Oof.
and it's a 128-page book.
These
Um,
these aren't just for painting miniatures anymore,
no,
Ty.
no, God, every now and then when I see that, I'll pull it out, I'll look at it fondly and go, "Oh my God."
Let me tell you what. I had
Yeah,
LASIK in 2011. I can make out surface details on the moon.
yeah, but up close,
This is a red blur.
yeah, that's I haven't had LASIK for that very reason because I've got very good up close vision. I can see perfectly, but I'm nearsighted. But I don't want to have to wear reading glasses, and that's what
Mhm.
my doctor said. Well, you have to wear. Normally, if you see me on a show with reading glasses, it's because I've got contacts in, and I'll put my reading glasses on
Yeah.
with contacts. But yeah, that was a strain even for the 15-year-old version of me. But apparently, what happened was is the myth I always heard was the two designers, Backhouse and Symbolist, took the typed manuscript to some convention and showed it to Gary Gygax, and Gary was like, yeah, not really very interested in this.
Mhm.
And so then they went to FGU, and I guess they just took those typewriters. We could take these typewritten sheets, shoot them down four to a page, and get this in a 128-page document. Made sense. And yeah, but that's that's the most unreadable game I've ever seen.
I love the kitchen sink feel and
Oh,
vibe.
it's a magnificent effort. I mean, and I've actually run and played Chivalry and Sorcery First Edition way the hell back. It it was it's hard. It was from a time where nobody really knew what role playing games were going to be. I mean, it was modules were brand new, right?
Yeah.
And so that set of rules contained all the normal stuff you'd want to see, the character generation stuff, a very elaborate, historically accurate magic system, and a very complex, elaborate combat system, all this kind of stuff, and a full-blown set of miniature wargame rules to fight army-sized battles. And the wargame rules were pretty good. They were very derivative of WRG's rules, but they were perfectly playable. Um, you know, I can only imagine. So I guess that would had to have been 500 typewritten pages
Oof.
that they walked up to Gygax and said, "Here's," And having met one of those guys, Backhouse, before he passed away, he was a jerk. I mean, we didn't get along at all. And so if he was anything like that, I can only imagine that Gygax would have said, "Yeah, thanks, but no
Yeah.
thanks." It's a magnificent work just to appreciate the effort that went into it.
I don't know if this is true, but I have heard that oh my gosh, that Rollmaster actually started as an alternate combat system. The guys who created
It's
Rollmaster
feasible.
picked up original D&D and said
Oh no, that's true. That's absolutely true.
that
They
okay,
sold it. It was sold in the Dragon. It was called Arms Law,
yeah, Arms Law.
and then Claw Law, which was animals. And they sold it in that you can find if you look at 1981-ish Dragons,
Hmm.
you'll see advertisements for it as a plug-in replacement system for D&D combat. Absolutely. And then they later said, "Huh, we could just make a role-playing game."
Yeah, yeah.
All the
And
cool kids are doing that now.
I think there were times, and I got to know Gary, lowercase f, friends with men.
Yeah,
I knew him at a time when he was, I call him Nerd Santa Claus. He
yeah.
was very approachable, very genial, very much the old gentleman. I mean,
Was this after he left TSR? Or?
this was in the early 2000s until he passed
Okay.
away.
Yeah, apparently that experience I'm sure would have scarred him, but apparently he became a lot more, you know, approachable
When
and
yeah, back in the day, and there are things that Ernie Gygax's oldest son has said that'll curl your hair about how Gary was back in the 80s, and I'm not gonna defend or denigrate, but uh, a lot of times Gary would put things in and APAs and publish editorials in the Dragon or just tell people at conventions, and he got pretty salty when it
uh-huh.
came to people picking away and saying, "Oh, I've got a better combat system," or Magic should use magic points and not advancing. He would get up people's noses about that,
As a
and
game designer myself, I
oh
have a
yeah, I've been
certain
meaning to
degree.
talk to you about the performance of the javelin missile tie. I
Yeah,
feel like it's
yeah.
not accurately modeled.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you want to meet some persnickety gamers, modern gamers, particularly when you get nationalism involved. We had a great war in the early 2000s on the Yahoo group called the Great Russian Tank War. This Russian tank expert got a copy of the rules and just tore us a new one for just being bigoted against the Russians and and of course the
I
Russians were my favorite army.
I call those guys the internet young pioneers. Like if you go look at that famous javelin demo where they shoot a fully armed and fueled T-72 with a javelin, and it like
Yeah.
the hull is disintegrated and the turret flies like 30 feet in the air. Oh my God, the Comrade Young pioneers that are like, this is American fake.
Oh no, I mean it was literally an. So the funny thing was, actually, this guy and I became good friends because
Cool.
what he did, I said, I was a history major. I would have been a historian had a few things gone differently in my life. So I'm like, look, give me primary source material that proves your point, and I'll take it. I mean, I'm working off the sources I've got, but I got to have something besides anecdotes. I'm not going to change my rules over just anecdotes because anecdotes, you know. Um, and he did. he sent me.
There you
He
go.
sent. He sent us a mountain of stuff from apparently Soviet archives that would have been top secret had the Soviet Union not collapsed. And we realized that we had under. What had happened was I calibrated the armor, and in Fistful of Toes, your weapons have a penetration,
Hmm.
and your vehicles have armor,
Right.
and the degree to which penetration overmatches armor determines the effect. Right. All right. I calibrated the penetration armor system based on observed performance in the Bekaa Valley, especially in the early '80s when Israeli tanks firing the standard U.S. penetrator against T-72s, they'd hit them. This would happen, and so I made assumptions about okay, this source says the T-72's armor is 200 millimeters. Well, then obviously the American penetrator can get through at least 200 millimeters. So what happened was we underestimated the performance of Russian tanks, but we also underestimated the performance of penetrators. So what I said was, okay, in the next version we'll correct this, but until then, raise the armor rating of all Russian tanks by 1 point and raise the penetration of all Western penetrators in the '80s by 1 point. That satisfied him. Had no game effect whatsoever. Now later on, we did do a much more in Fistful of Toes 3. We did a much more comprehensive and accurate treatment. But yeah, to contrast our approach with Gary Gygax, I have always encouraged people when they say, "I got a better way to do it." Knock yourself out. Let us know how it goes. Some of the rules in Fistful of Toes 3 are the results of players griping, fussing, or complaining about other rules. My only request is when you modify Fistful of Toes, tell whoever's playing it that you modified it, because that way you get the credit or the blame as applicable. And a lot of, and of course we also did a lot of explaining why we did this. You know, we modeled it this way because, and I found that a lot of times that settles gamers down a lot. If you can just tell them why the rule is written that way. Gary didn't do a very good job of that. He came off, especially in the early 80s, as arrogant, very arrogant, and condescending, and we found the way to do it, and no one, and it was very clear that D&D, while it was a good game, was certainly not the best role-playing game ever written in terms of mechanics and stuff. I mean, there were other games that did a whole lot of things better than D&D. D&D was just the first one, and there are elements of D&D that are brilliant. Don't get me wrong, but having gone through that myself, and we spent a lot of time and energy developing the rules and the data and all this, and somebody, you got that completely wrong. Well, it's tempting to say, well, we're smarter than you, shut up. But we always tried to be inclusive and say, well, help us. I had a guy from the UK one time. He questioned the armor on the Warrior, the British Warrior infantry fighting vehicle. Mm-hmm. We didn't have it rated in the old version. We had it rated as lower level special armor, basically. Sure. And I said, can you give me anything? And he faxed me pages out of some British public, probably a top secret thing, where they're describing the armor qualities of the Warrior, and I'm like, well, okay, that seems pretty convincing. So I changed the armor rating. But yeah, Gary, and you got to remember too, Gary Gygax was barely eking a living by, and all of a sudden he knocks out this thing. This. I can cut him a certain amount of slack as an adult that I couldn't cut him as a kid. Right?
Sure.
As a grown up, you go, I can go to your head.
The thing that I come back to from, people that say, well, I met Gary Gygax at a convention in 1983 and he was a right dick to me. So ever since then, my opinion of him is this. It goes back to that dealing with that judge. Okay, I don't know what he had going on that day, and I don't think he liked putting that young woman in jail overnight and dragging her screaming child away from her. In 1983, Gary Gygax was literally fighting to get his company back from usurpers.
And how galling that have to be when you were the architect of the product that company sells.
Yeah, and you're
I don't want to hear about the legalities of intellectual property and that crap. Gary Gygax created that game.
That's right. Okay?
Arneson had a role, other people had a role, but Gary was the one that went, characters. You're going to run one character. Yes, I know there was a game called Bronstein that sort of did that already, but the other part of it was, and we're going to do it in a fantasy setting. D&D doesn't do anything if it's set in World War II or the Wild West or science fiction. But at that moment, Tolkien was all the rage. Conan books were being reprinted. I mean, fantasy was the happening thing. Frazetta, Frazetta paintings were everywhere, rock albums and everything else.
Yep.
That to me was Gary Gygax's most brilliant insight. And, that's worthy of acclaim. The mechanics worked. They weren't perfect, but they worked, and they were good enough. And in some ways, I've always been a big fan of the Vancian magic system. Mm-hmm. Because I've been a fanatic at playing games like Fantasy Trip and RuneQuest that had point-based systems. But the Vancian magic system just works.
Yeah.
And I don't care what the rationale is. We're talking about something that doesn't exist. So whatever.
Yeah.
It's not logical. Shut up. Fine then. See this as though you're expending point. You had to memorize the spell and you had to, get your internal energy to work out to only that spell could be cast. Whatever, it just worked. D&D's level system was absurd. Okay, yes, a fourth level fighter has as many hit points as a horse, but guess what? It worked. It allowed you to go in and crawl through try dungeon crawl in classic RuneQuest. You'll be lucky to come out of that with one arm and one leg.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, D&D...
People talk about Traveler's combat system. Good grief.
D&D
RuneQuest just lop limbs off.
It's perfect at being Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes. Yeah.
It is perfect at being Dungeons and Dragons. Go find me a group that's run G1, G2, and G3, the Against the Giants modules, in Rollmaster and had fun. God, yeah. Those people don't exist. They're as made up as the Giants.
No, that's it. Dungeons and Dragons was designed for the dungeon crawl, or the dungeon crawl was designed for dungeons. I don't know, one or the other. Yep. And no game has ever done it as well. And frankly, no game's even come close.
Nope.
It just, and like I said, I carried a torch for Fantasy Trip all those years before Steve Jackson got the IP back and redid it. Played it, ran a lot of campaigns, but I had to trick it out to do dungeon crawls because the combat system was too deadly. And, but Garrett, and there were some odd things. Why did the armor class system go from high to low?
I can tell you
why. I
don't
know.
I can tell you why right now.
I'm all ears.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there was a war game, and it was either Don't Give Up the Ship or Ironclads.
Don't Give Up the Ship. That was a TSR produced game
that had grades of armor. Grade 1 armor was the best armor. Grade 2 wasn't as good. Grade 3 wasn't as grade 2. So you want a class 1 suit of armor.
Okay.
Not a class 3 suit of armor, not a class 5 suit of armor, but a class 1 suit of armor. And in a fantasy game, what would be the best armor? Plate mail and shield.
Yeah. No, you're right. Don't Give Up the Ship existed. It was a set of naval Age of Sail rules. I think who was it? Who was the business partner that died?
Don Kaye.
I think he might have been the author of that. I'm not sure. Don't hold me that. But yeah, but I mean, D&D had those little odd things about it. But guess what? I found my old notes. In fact, I gave Zach a copy right before I met them face to face. I happened to be going through some stuff, found some of my old notes. I had a progressive armor class system that I used in the early 80s. I'd forgotten all about it. It worked basically exactly like the Wizards of the Coast redo. So the things you didn't like about D&D, you could fix real easily.
Yeah.
There weren't any,
And that, I think that's one of the things that Wizards of the Coast, when they took over from TSR, they saved them from financial disaster, but I don't think anyone who's worked on a Dungeons and Dragons since 2nd edition has understood the organicness of the D&D rules. They don't understand that those rules weren't built, they grew. They came
they organically grew, so you would imagine that they would be optimized for a certain type of thing that they organically grew.
Exactly. Yeah. But the approach since then has been, well, we need to build a modular bolt-on machine. Yeah. And that's like one of the things, and people think that I criticize later editions out of hand.
I don't play
for not. I played 3rd edition for a long time in the
I
early
did try
2000s.
to play 3rd edition, and then I said, you know what?
There is one.
Life's too damn short.
One right way, correct way, most optimized way to plan, build, and play a fighter in third and a half edition. One way. Taking these given feats, these given skills, and when you get to bump a stat up, which you do in there, is to bump it up this specific way. It's like a pachinko machine. The ball will fall exactly.
If I wanted to play champions or GURPS, I'd play champions or GURPS.
Exactly.
That's no. I didn't care for the 3rd edition combat system either, because what it was a pretty cheesy ripoff of the Fantasy Trip combat system. Fantasy Trip's combat system worked because you had very few hit points. your average fighter had a strength of about 11,
Mhm.
and a broadsword did 2 dice damage. So, you're not going to be in combat a whole lot. Well, you have a combat system like that where you've got 30, 40, 50 hit points and weapons that do 5 or 6 points of damage or whatever. It's just, anyway, I always like theater of the mind as the approach anyway when I ran dungeon crawls.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to watch when I ran D&D for my daughters and their young men. It was very interesting to see their reaction. Oh my God, we're just playing. We're just playing. We're not looking stuff up in books. We're not trying.
I go to local events a lot, and I
And
run AD&D and original D&D. And Ty, I got to tell you, I've had people who say, I've never played this, I've heard of it. People half my age, hell, people quarter my age now,
yeah, that's getting to be more and more common, unfortunately.
sitting down and playing 1974 D&D or 1978 AD&D. Never have I had a person say, I hated this.
Mm-mm.
They all say, this is awesome, I can just do anything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's part of the thing, and we saw this developing in the hobby even in the early '80s, right? Rules creep. We got to have a rule for everything. We got to keep it. Well, classic D&D, right or wrong, said, okay, a lot of this stuff we're going to leave it up to the dungeon master to figure out. And from a game design standpoint, that's actually quite intelligent, because here's the thing. If the DM can let him figure it out, because most of these things weren't things that are going to happen a whole lot anyway.
Yep.
Right? How many times is a player character going to actually have to cook dinner and it matter? Okay.
Exactly.
Do we really need a cooking skill? Or whatever the skill happens to be. What I did in my group was I said, okay, tell me one good thing that's not combat related, not related to your class, that you're good at. It can't step on the shoes of any other class. Swimming. Okay, good. You're a really good swimmer. That's skills in my D&D game. But basically, I assume if you're a fighter, you're going to know things that most fighters would know how to do, such as, cook at a campsite, set up a tent, ride a horse at least competently, climb a wall with rope. I mean, we don't have to have separate skills and separate rules and all that kind of crap. Let the DM, but the problem is that puts a great deal of pressure on the DM. And the fact of the matter is there are a lot fewer good DMs than there are players, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Maybe the rules were designed to do that. But I was lucky. The very first game I ever played was AD&D, and it was with an excellent DM. And then the second game I ever played was with another excellent DM. So I had somebody show me how to do it.
The first D&D I ever played, I love telling this story. The first D&D I ever played was not by any rule set. I didn't know that there was a D&D rule book.
Well, in a perfect world, you shouldn't.
I thought everything came in the module. As luck would have it, the first module that I bought when I was 11 years old was Keep on the Borderlands. It just so happens that Keep on the Borderlands has 2 pull-out pages full of charts and explanations.
Summarizing okay.
So I invited my sister, Beth, and my friend from up the block, Tommy Miner, to play D&D using just Keep on the Borderlands. I sussed out, okay, they talked about the stats, so I figured, well, you got to generate a number between 3 and 18, roll a d20 and ignore 1s and 2s and 19s and 20s. It makes for very flat characters. But the point of it was it was that easy for me to pick up. Yeah. It was that simple. And kind of as a consequence of that, I am a 40-year dungeon master.
Yeah.
This coming next fall, it will be 40 years, and I'm the guy who DMs.
I rarely play. Rarely. I DM almost exclusively. And in fact, I've been in a few role-playing games where I've actually been a player, and it's kind of a weird, actually. What I always said, I never hesitated to invite people into my games, especially when I was in college and stuff. I remember running games with 18 people.
Sure.
You could actually do that with D&D. I mean, it was crazy. But what I'd say is, don't worry about the rules. Just tell me what you want to do. Tell me what I'm gonna hit him with a sword. Okay, roll a d20. Tell me what you roll.
You absolutely get it. Well,
I'll do all the rules. I'll do behind the screen.
Yep. Hey,
and
Gary Gygax, the only reason that a dungeon master should ever roll the dice is because he likes the sound it makes on the table.
Or if you just want, or you just want to convince your players that they actually have a chance.
Sure. So
Well, yeah, I mean that, but yeah, D&D is AD&D is still. I started with AD&D. Otherwise, I'd probably be saying the same thing about original or basic D&D. But D&D first edition, whatever that is, it just works.
I'm going to throw
as an adult, I can certainly understand Gary Gygax's frustration with gamers walking up and confidently proclaiming that they know how to do it better than he did.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, and I'm pretty sure he had a lot more people say that to him than I ever did with Fistful of Toes.
I'm going to throw the gauntlet down here, sir. As someone who has suffered like you have as being the eternal DM, we play AD&D on Monday nights on Discord. You are more than welcome to join us.
Okay.
If you're not streaming with Nick and you don't mind staying up late.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is I tend to go in real early. There have been times where I've gotten off Nick's stream if I didn't drink anything, got dressed, went on into the office. But what time do y'all play?
We play. It would be from 9 to midnight your time.
I'll see what I can do. It depends. If I have a light day on a Tuesday or something, maybe I can. I'd like, who else? Is anybody in it that I know? Or
me?
Frog God guys?
I mean,
are any of the Frog God guys?
No. This is a collection of folks. Just friends of mine. Just like a big. What is that video game? Katamari Ball. I've just kind of picked up players as things have rolled along. It's a good group of guys. I will tell you that if you're familiar with Osric, the open source reimplementation of AD&D, I was a cheerleader for it. Let me say that.
Well, I've told Matt Finch that there's a place in hell for people who deleted the monk from
I was not responsible for that.
But I was concerned for his soul, and then I think you need to make it right with God, because I think that's going to,
If you look,
I use Osric actually typically. I call it. I mean, Osric is a great reference word for AD&D, except for the aforementioned Black of the Monk class.
If you look in the Osric rules, you'll see my name in the credits. I wrote 2 paragraphs in Osric, 2 or 3 monster entries. I did something. I did some monster entries. I think I did giant spiders and sphinxes, like the types of sphinxes. I made open source versions of those, but a couple of the guys from that place and time are in the game. So
well, I owe them a debt of gratitude, because that's actually what I refer to when I run AD&D. It is a much better organized resource.
Let me tell you something. I love Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I will never not play AD&D. When I pass away, I hope it's with a Dungeon Master's Guide on my lap. Oh my God, and when I do pass away with a Dungeon Master's Guide on my lap, it's probably because I had an aneurysm trying to find something in there.
Well, I'm pretty fond of it myself. The thing that that modern gamers might find jarring about a lot of the old games, especially D&D, it was a toolkit more than a game.
Yep.
This was Gary Gygax saying, "Okay, here's a big box of tools, make a campaign." And so a lot of the stuff that seems out of place, weird, why do we have rules in here for building castles? Well,
because you might want to build a castle.
Well, again, you didn't know what role-playing game, what the contours of the hobby really were. That's another thing too, is the hobby grew out of wargaming.
Mm-hmm.
It really wasn't until the 80s that the comic book fans became role-playing game fans. And so, wargamers like to know how to build a castle.
I mean, it says right here on the cover of original D&D, it says, "Rules for fantastic medieval war games, campaign playable with pencil and paper and miniature figures." It doesn't say role-playing game.
Nope, it doesn't say storytelling or any that kind of stuff.
No,
but D&D, and Traveller is another game that really shows that the first edition Traveller is a brilliantly designed game.
Oh yeah,
because in literally 3 tiny books, you get everything from a combat system, a character creation system, skills, planets, how to generate credible alien critters. I mean, the whole package. What they didn't do is give you an adventure, or 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 even for that matter, a DM screen.
Yeah.
But back in those days, that's what that was the state of the hobby. And so first edition D&D is jarring to a lot of people, but it's invigorating. I like to occasionally just pull out the old DM's guide and just leaf through it.
Oh yeah, me too. Constantly.
Like, oh my God, wow, there really were rules for this. Or, oh yeah, I remember that. Because that is a toolkit. You could take the 3D&D books and you could create any role-playing game you'd ever want to play. You've got everything you need there. You even got examples in there of a Wild West setting. The conversion
Six guns
rules
and
for Boot Hill.
sorcery. Six guns and sorcery.
You got the conversion rules for that. You've got enough information in there that you could tease out what guns ought to look like. I mean, and the system is sufficiently flexible to accommodate any setting. As Ward demonstrated with Metamorphosis Alpha, another unheralded classic in my
Oh yeah. You gotta. I'll send you the direct link. You gotta watch the Jim Ward live stream.
I will do that. Yeah, because
Jim talks a lot about his stuff, and just I was a deprived child. I never had a copy of Gamma World back in the day. I got a print-on-demand copy. I'm in love with Gamma World. I am a
Oh
new...
yeah, well it's AD&D. It's AD&D with giant rabbits that have, that can turn metal into rubber.
Yeah, and Jim says that in Gamma World. He says this game is designed to be compatible with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
It is a very different game. You don't have levels. The hit points are you roll dice equal to your constitution, as I recall.
Yeah.
So Gamma World characters have a lot more hit points starting, but the weaponry does a hell of a lot more damage too.
True.
Like
you get hit with
6
a
or 8
black ray
dice
gun, and roll up another character.
But science fantasy, yeah. Gamma World was really just an expansion of Metamorphosis Alpha.
Mm-hmm.
I ran a Metamorphosis Alpha campaign briefly. It's one of those things. I've often thought about running trying to run a game or two of some of the old esoteric stuff that I have run, like the Morrow Project. Did you ever see that game?
Yes, the Morrow Project. Oh, that I've run a few Morrow Project games.
That's actually a really cool. So for the audience, Morrow Project is an after the Holocaust game. The characters have been put in suspended animation. They're supposed to wake up a couple of years after the big nuclear war and rebuild civilization. Something goes wrong and you wake up 150 years later, and and so you got all that, but the game system itself is a riot. It actually has blood points. it's the only game I've ever played where you can actually bleed out.
Yep.
Just an insanely, it really is a precursor almost to Twilight 2000. It has that same degree of crunch to it that Twilight 2000 later did, but that's when I ran a Weird West version of Boot Hill one time for a few games. It prefigured what was that game? What was the Weird West game that was popular about?
Deadlands.
Deadlands.
Yeah.
Prefigured Deadlands because there was a valley of Gwangi with a dinosaur.
Nice.
There was. I had seen there actually is a movie out there, and I strongly recommend that you hunt it down. Dracula versus Billy the Kid. That movie does exist.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
And Billy the Kid pistol whips Dracula. At one point. So, yeah. I ran a top secret game. I actually ran several of those. That was just a crazy time. It was like every time you turn around, there'd be some new settings. Oh my God, a role-playing game for spies. Well, yeah, why not? But none of them were ever as what's the right word? None of them had the staying power that D&D did.
Yeah.
Because D&D just had limitless scope, and it was designed for that most visceral of things, the underground maze filled with monsters and treasure. You get fighting, you get acquisition, and you get exploration all in one package, and a nice resource allocation problem.
Mm-hmm.
We're low on spells, we're low on hit points, might be time to leave. All that stuff. And I think that there's too much garbage in the modern role-playing games. And again, I don't want to be the grumpy old man. We did it better in our day. But again, if you got a good DM, you don't need all those other rules. You really don't. And you won't miss them.
Right.
So I was telling my daughters that. I said, let's play this. And Brittany's, my younger daughter's young man, he was running a 5th edition campaign. And he was a little bit jarred by it. It's like, this is it? Said, trust me, you're not going to miss any of that stuff. I promise you.
Yeah.
I have one little affectation. I've bought over the years probably a couple of pounds of cheap Mexican coins, pesos, different sizes and all that.
Sure.
And I spray paint them silver and gold. And so we actually have play money in my D&D game.
Oh, that's cool.
There's nothing more delightful than to say to the players, that'll be 5 gold pieces, please. Collect their money.
Nice. I like that.
That's the one little one of the few little tweaks. But yeah, no, I would always run D&D if I had a choice. And if it doesn't do something that you want done, well, come up with a way to do it. I mean, one of the easiest things in the world for AD&D is to use a D20 versus the attribute.
Yep. And there's at least a few
modules. We don't need
modules
rules to see if he
that.
falls off the horse. Roll a D20 against his dex.
Yeah.
Problem solved. I mean,
or use the saving throws.
Yeah.
It's I'm gonna dance and impress the king. Give me save versus death.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're gonna die if you fail.
But the king's hard to impress.
Yeah, he's really hard to impress. Give me a save versus death magic. Oh, you rolled a 20. He's super impressed. You rolled a 1. He throws you out of the castle.
Stuff they did in 3rd edition I didn't like either. They harmonized all the modifiers. Okay, I understand some level, that's fine. But you also did another thing. You made attributes basically useless. Now you have 6 attributes. +1, +2, +3, 0, 7. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In fact, there was a game that, what was it? Castles and Crusades. There was another one of those retro clones early on that didn't even have attributes, just had the modifier directly. That was
I've seen those. Yeah, I've seen a couple that do that.
So the thing is, in D&D, if that attribute was broken out separately, it was different than the other attributes. Except I think maybe in the dead center of the bell curve, like 10 and 11 or something.
Yeah.
But a strength 14 was different than a strength 13 and a strength 15. It mattered.
Yeah.
So it was just things I didn't care for that. I didn't care for that. I was never a big fan of rolling against a difficulty number. That system originated in Tunnels and Trolls, the second role-playing game ever. I never cared for it in Tunnels and Trolls. I don't care for it in D&D. I just, I'd rather use just rolls against attributes or something like that, or rolls against attribute your level or something. I don't know. I just don't like it.
Roll a d6.
Well, and the attributes don't matter
great,
a whole
you
lot.
Succeed.
You're rolling a d20 and your best attribute is a +3 or +4. It's like, I kind of think Conan, when he's rolling against his strength, ought to be able to do better than just a 20% greater chance of success.
And it goes back to that Baroque organicness. Like, well, why percent strength? Why not? Because it's cool.
Well, that's the other thing too, right? Is there's a Thomas Sowell, one of my favorite economists, among other things. He made a comment about today. He said, the last 50 years have been a massive experiment in replacing what has been demonstrated to work with what sounds good. And so when someone says, well, I don't understand why D&D is so, we had a lot of those wars in the late 90s on Usenet, by the way.
Yes, I was in there. I said some embarrassing things in there, but yes.
I stand by pretty much all the stuff I said, because I complain. If you don't like the rule, change it. Why are you griping? Why are you griping? If your DM can't, I remember one guy one time said, there's no rules for climbing a tree. And I said, if your DM can't adjudicate that, then he doesn't need to be a dungeon master. You should. He's one of the best DMs ever. Well, you're the one saying he's an incompetent moron, not me.
If you, and I asked Gary about that when I first interviewed him. I said, did you look at early D&D and think, and the other RPGs that came out shortly thereafter, and think, crap, we need a skill system? And he said, no, because if you're going out and your job, your 9 to 5, is stick my face in a dungeon full of kill,
Not a lot of skills, really.
You damn well better be able to climb a tree, swim a river, snare a
Right.
rabbit, make a fire, build a punji steak pit. That's assumed that
Mhm.
because you're going out into literally the most dangerous profession in Greyhawk, you know,
That
hey,
you've
there's a
got
there,
all the skills that somebody would need.
you've got the, you know,
That's how I always interpret it. I interpret it. We didn't need all those skills because they were already there.
yeah,
And
it's an
and
avatar based game, as it was how
yeah,
Gary described it.
that's a good way to say it.
It is
Yeah, that's another thing about the old school stuff too, is that you were the player was, almost intelligence was almost an unnecessary stat, right? Or and wisdom too, for that matter. Really, I mean, they were necessary for clerics, but I'm just saying, you know, because the player is the one that provides the intelligence and the wisdom.
Yep.
There was a SPI came out with a game called Dragon Quest, which could have been a contender until SPI went out of business because TSR
Bought them
bought them.
and canned them.
But that role playing system doesn't have an IQ stat. There's no intelligence stat. Well, you don't need it.
Well,
No, I support Gary's idea though that you didn't need skills because, and if you did need them, they didn't have to be very complicated at all.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, literally, tell me 3 or 4 things you're really good at. Now, tell me one thing that you really suck at. Okay, there you go.
There you go.
I, I know a lot about military history. Okay, great.
Super.
I'll find a way for that to matter in an adventure. I promise you.
This is an axiom that I have maintained for years, and I think it's 100% true. If you give me a group of experienced gamers, not even necessarily ones who've played the module before, but you give me people who have played enough role playing games and enough first edition advanced Dungeons and Dragons, I can give each of them a 5th level character, cut them loose in the Tomb of Horrors, and odds are they're going to come out alive. You give me you give me a group of players of new role-playing games who have had everything, is easy, everything is training wheels. I will give each of them a 12th level, 2 12th level characters. They
They'll
will
get
be
slaughtered.
they will be dead before they get a third of the way
Oh,
through.
because I think the rules are going to save them.
Yeah, hey, they
Rules are gonna
think the
save
rules
you.
are going to save them, and like the 4th edition,
You know,
every edition of D&D has had a version of Tomb of Horrors written for it. It was originally created for original D&D. It was released for AD&D. The OD&D version was never released until
I didn't realize that. I thought it was always an AD&D thing. So that's interesting.
no. In fact, if you get the Dungeons and Dragons Art and Arcana the deluxe set, it comes with the facsimile of the original D&D manuscript. It's a worthy expenditure. It
I
really
think
is.
I may have it. If I don't, I'll get it.
But
I know you'll find this hard to believe, but I don't always remember what I have.
same.
Yeah,
But
so
there's a Return to the Tomb of Horrors for 2nd edition. There's a Tomb of Horrors for 3rd. There's a Tomb of Horrors for 4th. The 3rd edition, I think, is the most egregious one because it literally has saving throws for things that don't get saving throws.
3rd edition, I rebelled on 3rd edition. I tried to like it, because it was the first new version of D&D. And I ran a game campaign for a good little while.
Yeah, same.
But
Same.
you know what really turned me off of all things? I don't want have to allocate a half page to describe a monster.
Yeah,
Remember Fistful of Toes, right?
right.
Vehicles
One-
and M1
one-
tank stats
one
are on one line of notebook paper because I want to be able to refer to 20 or 30 different vehicles in a game. Same is true of monsters. Classic D&D. How hard is it to hit? How much damage does it do? And how long will it last?
Hey, check out my custom original D&D blank character sheet.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. That's yeah. You ought to. It'd be an interesting thing on your game. Demonstrate how fast you can roll up a cleric in AD&D. Do the 4. I always did the 4 dice, take the best 3.
Yeah.
Range stats. To anybody that ever has hacked through first of all, any game that requires an hour to create characters is asinine. And here's my theory on that. It makes the DM very reticent to kill anybody because they're going to,
Yes.
It makes the players a lot less willing to risk anything. D&D, man, you get killed, okay, go roll up a new character.
You
All
know,
right, you walk into the room, there's Bob, he's all tied up, and there's
yeah.
his gear sitting beside him.
You know the spell in AD&D Melf's Acid Arrow?
I do.
Okay. Do you know why? Okay, Melf is the name of a magic user. Do you know why Melf is called Melf?
No.
Melf is one of Luke Gygax's characters.
Okay.
Created him on a 3x5 card in his dad's game. Male elf.
Melf.
M.elf. One of the most iconic spells in AD&D is because of the brevity and ease of character creation in
Because they
original
wanted to
D&D.
get to the play.
Because they
also the
wanted to
only
get
game
to
that
the
ever
play.
approached D&D in that aspect was Fantasy Trip. You could create a Fantasy Trip character nearly as quickly as a D&D character, and it had a very nice little skill system.
Do you know what I have? I've got to see if yes, it's easily reachable. I'm going to grab this real quick. I have the I have a rare-ish item here that is a TFT clone. You may have actually heard of this.
Yes, Dragons of Under.
Dragons of Under.
That was.
I found this new in shrink wrap on eBay for like $20. I bought it and did an unboxing.
It's a simplified version of In the of the role playing game, and I didn't. I mean, I didn't care for it because it simplified some of the stuff that I liked. But yeah, that came along after Steve Jackson parted ways with metagaming too, and there seemed to be a concerted effort in metagaming's part to change Fantasy Trip just because they could.
Yeah. That
Yes, there was a lot of behind the scenes bickering about this mechanic or that mechanic, and you know.
Yeah.
And some changes were better than others, but as far as creating character quickly, Fantasy Trip is the only game I've ever run into that was nearly as fast. In Fantasy Trip, you have 3 stats. You've got Strength, Dex, and IQ. Mm-hmm. How strong you are, how quick you are, how smart you are. And you allocate points, a small number, 32 to start with. Minimum of 8 at each stat. Your Strength determines your hit points and the size weapon you can use. Your Dex is your to-hit chance, and it's modified downward by armor, so heavier armor does slow you down. Your intelligence is everything that IQ would encompass, as well as perception and da-da-da. And then you get your IQ points in talents, which are skills. So sword is 2 IQ points, shield is 1. Real rudimentary system, but it gave you could create analogs of all the D&D character classes quite easily. No healing spells. Talk about a game for real men. No healing spells.
But then what I've seen of TFT, that would be simple enough to add if you were so inclined.
Well, it turns out you really don't have to. You have a talent called Physiker, which lets you heal 2 points of damage after every combat, and Master Physiker, which is 3 points. Well, when your hit points total typically 10 to 12 points,
that's a pretty significant bump.
Yeah, it is. And so what you do is you take a Physiker and you could create a magical version of that, or you could call that talent a magical talent if you wanted to. But I've always delighted. No healing spells. That's for wussies. You die at 0. So but it had a very nice, very elegant, very fluid combat system that was everything 3rd edition D&D was not. But it worked because combats didn't last very long. You 3 or 4 rounds and it's over. I mean, and so therefore you could have, this tactical battlefield setup. It was done on a hex grid, but many of us used square grids. It wasn't a big deal.
Sure.
And it's very clear to me that the authors of 3rd edition D&D definitely knew about Fantasy Trip. It had a lot of the same mechanics. They left some things out, which was unfortunate. Fantasy Trip had a mechanic from the old wargaming days. You exerted a zone of control. In other words, if a figure moved adjacent to you, they had to stop because you could fight them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as I recall, 3rd edition had the move pass, and they get to do an attack as
the
you
attack
go
of opportunity. Yeah.
Again, slow the game down.
Yeah.
As you can tell, I'm a big fan of keeping the game moving.
3rd edition is 30 minutes of fun packed into 4 hours.
I would say that's a fair characterization.
Yeah.
And it could have been great.
Yeah.
And as some of the retro clones have shown, you can strip it down into something that's workable. But at that point, you're recreating D&D. Well, AD&D, just go play AD&D.
Yeah. It's like
You know, and that's
when people say, "Oh, now I am not bad mouthing Castles and Crusades," but when people say, "Well, you wrote a Castles and
yeah,
you've done some stuff for Castles and Crusades. Why don't you play Castles and Crusades?" Because the things I want out of a fantasy role playing game, that when I start bolting them into other fantasy role playing games, lead me back to AD&D.
yeah,
I can do, I can
and
prepare a good campaign, or I can spend that time tweaking rules.
yeah, yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, Castles. Well, and the other thing for me personally as well, Castles and Crusade was designed by somebody else. At the end of the day, I tweak any game that I ever play,
Yeah,
and in AD&D, actually AD&D has survived relatively intact. The only things I've done have been more accommodations than actual changes. They're like giving you maximum hit points at first level,
sure.
letting you reroll, things like that. That's not really a change in the game. I did create a swashbuckler class that basically was a fighter. That basically, as I recall, you got double. The sole difference was you got double your dex bonus for armor, but you couldn't wear anything but leather or less. So net, you wound up with approximately a similar, slightly inferior armor class to a fighter, but you could move quicker and you could do the swashbuckling thing. And
Very cool.
the fighter class was capable of modeling barbarians. It was capable of modeling samurai. All those other classes that people kept throwing into the game, including Gary later on,
Yeah, yeah.
were unnecessary. The fighter is the guy that kills things, whether he's wielding a samurai sword or a battle axe or a Conan two-handed, mega sword. It's the same character class. You don't need to. That was something that I definitely liked about D&D too. Not 15,000 different classes and subclasses and this, that, and the other thing. Acknowledge. Oh, I did tweak the monk. The monk was way underpowered, in my opinion,
Yeah.
at lower levels. And in my games, you never got to 10th level because I didn't do Monty Hall. you know, something was going to kill you before then. I promise you.
The monk was one of those great organic things in D&D. It was literally, I think it was Arneson was watching TV and kung fu.
Martial art kung fu movies were all the rage in the late
The
'70s.
the TV show Kung Fu with David Carradine was on it, and he was like, "Oh, I'm putting that in."
Well, the extent of my changes to the monk class, where I gave him a D6 of hit points instead of D4s,
Yeah,
it seemed reasonable, and I let them have strength and dex bonuses to armor class and damage and stuff. That was it, and that buffed them just enough that they could survive.
yeah,
But
yeah.
but no, it's just as games go, I think the AD&D and old D&D, let's call it that,
Sure.
in all of its incarnations is a classic forever. And it would be very interesting to see TSR one day just go, you know what? Let's just reissue AD&D and be done with it.
I've been silently hoping that one day they would that they would
It could use organization.
that they would basically just if not re-release it, just open it up so I, Bill Sylvie, can kitchen sink publish an AD&D module that I don't have to tiptoe around the rules and so on.
Yeah. I mean, you can, and of course, Frog God has got a very nice, Matt's Swords and Wizardry is a great reimagining of original D&D. I'm an AD&D guy though, so I'm sorry. God intended for there to be armor class 10, not 9.
That is correct.
We all have our religious convictions. That happens to be one of mine. And fighters need a D10 of hit dice.
Well,
At least in my campaigns.
I've already decided that I want to invite you back because I really want to.
Oh God, man, we've been sitting here babbling for hours.
I know, but it's been fun. I'm not even leading up to buy or anything like that. But if you need to go, I completely understand.
Nobody's come and gotten me yet. They never forgotten about me. So.
I've gotten some requests for dinner over text. So, but I'm the cook. But anyway.
Oh yeah, you might have to. See that. Yeah,
but I do want you to come back because if you and God, I hate what I'm about to say is going to sound so wormy, but would you please ask Nick if you guys are going to talk about the OGL? I'm a nobody, I get it, but if I could be on that stream,
yeah, yeah.
if I could be on that stream,
we've kicked it around off and on. Yeah, that'd be good because you can give kind of a gamer's perspective.
And if you
we
guys
can talk about it like lawyers,
yeah, if you guys don't,
I sure will.
Then I want you to come here and you and I'll talk about it.
Okay.
And you can be the law talking guy and I can be the idiot gamer.
Nick's always looking for interesting subjects, and I told him about that.
I'm a pretty interesting subject.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they sue regularly. I mean, the mythology was too, wasn't there? Was another company out there that did a lot of that, Palladium. They tended to litigate.
Oh God, Kevin Simbada, still to this day. To this day, Kevin Simbada will friggin' sue you.
Suing Wizards of the Coast when Magic became a thing?
I honestly, at this point, I can't think of when he's not suing someone. That's going to be on Ty Beard and Bill Sylvie Crazy Gibberish next episode. We're going to talk about that guy.
It's a shame, too, because he's a very talented artist. He always did some of the best black and white stuff, and his game. I didn't care for his game systems, but he put his guts into it, very obviously. Yeah. But that whole thing. I mean, if you're suing people for this hobby, you're missing the point.
Yeah, but Ty, you could win tens of dollars in court.
Tens of dollars,
tens of
20s of dollars, even.
Yeah, dozens of dollars to be made in role-playing game design.
I had a great professor in my creditors' rights class. I took debtor-creditor law in law school. One was bankruptcy, one was creditors' rights, and da-da-da-da. And so she comes in the first day. She was a Harvard law graduate, but just a really good lady, good professor. And she says, okay, I'll tell you what the first question on the exam is going to be, and I'm going to give you the answer. So this is a freebie. Just be sure you answer this question right. And she writes in gigantic letters, a judgment is not money. And throughout that course, she did an outstanding job of saying, you can get this legal remedy. However, your client isn't going to be happy if they can't pay. So part of your job is and who on earth are you going to sue in the role-playing space outside of Wizards and some of these other places that are really going to be, I mean, it's pointless. And at the end of the day, focus your energies on writing games.
Yeah,
but I do remember Palladium being renowned for litigation.
Yep. You remember correctly.
That was a 90s thing, as I recall. They were more late 80s, early 90s. That's when they were. Yeah. See, I abandoned role-playing when I became a serious, professional lawyer. So I stopped role-playing, and it's all Frog God's fault. They dragged me out of the closet. I don't think Zach would mind me telling this. It's so funny when Zach called me, he said, Mr. Beard, I represent, I'm with Frog God Games. We're a role-playing game company. I said, let me stop you right there. I'm a role player. He goes, oh, good. I mean, you can imagine trying to tell a lawyer who's never heard of role-playing before in your initial call, it's like cowboys and Indians, but with rules. I don't know how you describe it exactly.
There comes a point when we gamers, we are so focused on our hobbies, we assume that because role-playing has kind of gotten some traction with Stranger Things and with other media outlets, that it's become common enough coin that we can just sit down with Joe Average and start talking about hit points and armored classes and spells, and they're going to at least grok it a little bit. My business is called Guide Key, and I do corporate D&D games.
Okay.
Basically,
business wargaming.
Yeah. I team build through getting a group of people in a company together and playing a role-playing game. I had a client this past summer who their organizational person who I interfaced with to get a game started, it was like, and I'm not denigrating the woman, she was a very nice lady, but yeah, now Dungeons and Dragons, what is that? kind of reaction. And I was like, well, it's a role-playing game. Uh-huh. But once I brought her up to speed, she was very cool with it and sat
Hey,
in
you
on a
almost want to
couple of
whip an
sessions.
adventure out
but-
of your pocket. Say, okay,
Yeah.
you're in a long corridor. Forget why you're there. You got a sword and you got armor. There's a door at the end. There's two doors, one on each side. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And just do that for 5 minutes. Go. That's Dungeons and Dragons.
It's
It's like cowboys and Indians with rules.
I'll have to
That's how I
file
always
that
explain
one,
it
so.
to people. I couldn't,
That-
but I remember the tension level on the phone call. Just
Oh, thank God.
thank God, somebody that actually.
I can
Well, it
spare
just
him
so
the
happened-
preamble.
I even did them better than that. I actually had some Frog God games stuff that I bought. I mean, I like their stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I never really got out of role playing. I just didn't do it very much. And of course, when my daughters were little, I didn't force them to play my hobby or my games. And of course, now they're like, Dad, we would have loved to have role played them. Then give me grandchildren, and I will teach them. But yeah. So it's all it's between Nick Rekieta and Frog God. I have come out of the closet. I have embraced my nerddom.
And me and this now, because I'm
Yeah.
gonna get you
Yeah.
back. You're
Well,
you're coming back for another episode. So
I told Nick one time. I said, I had a happy life. I was an attorney. I had these business clients. I had a law firm. I was doing fine. My life was good, And then you show up at my doorstep with 12 dwarves, and saying you need a burglar. And I said, and then and all went sideways from that point on.
happy to drag you sideways, man. All right, listen, I do need to get on out of
Yeah,
here.
sounds
Ty,
good. Me too.
thank you
enjoyed
so
it.
much for coming on. This was an
Thank you for
absolute
having me. This was a hoot.
gas. So you're going to come back though. I can get you
Sure,
back
yeah,
on
just
another
let me know.
stream. Awesome.
I'll have to make amends with Nick. Tell him I'm not running around behind his back or anything.
Yeah. Tell him I'm nowhere near as
He's had
popular
other
as him.
lawyers on his show, so
Well, there you go.
fair's fair. It's
Fair
good
is
for the
fair.
goose.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. Well, you have a good one. I
Thank
thoroughly
you.
enjoyed it.
You have a fantastic one too, Ty. Peace.
All right. Bye bye.
Have you seen my owl bear? Here's to all the weirdos everywhere in the woods and in the air. Have you seen my owl bear? Should I shave off all my hair? Bobs are all around, some live in tunnels underground. Some are fat, some are rich, some are sleeping in a ditch. Can you ride a crooked horse without a saddle way off course? Naked as a toad all the way to Smoky Joe's. Have you seen the little creep driving fast in his little green Jeep? He smells like fish and brandy, but his rotten teeth look dandy. Take me